On Valentine's Day in Tijuana, Elizabeth was excited about a second date with a man she had recently met. As usual, she let her family know where she was going, even shared her location for safety. Initially, everything seemed fine. However, her messages suddenly stopped. Her phone went quiet, and her car was missing. By the next morning, her family began searching everywhere for her, hoping to find any clue. What they uncovered shattered their hearts and revealed a more disturbing situation in the city. Elizabeth was not alone. Her case was just the start of a troubling pattern. Elizabeth Martinez Figueroa was born in 1996 in Tijuana, Baja California, a city on the border between Mexico and the United States. She was the youngest of 7 siblings. People who knew her described Elizabeth as a cheerful and gentle young woman who had a strong bond with her mother. Her mother was more than just a mother to her. She was her anchor, confidant, and main source of strength. By early 2022, Elizabeth accomplished something her family had never achieved before. She graduated with a degree in international trade and business from a private university. This was a significant milestone, but it didn't satisfy her ambitions. She aspired to pursue a master's degree to create more opportunities for herself and her family. While planning her educational journey, Elizabeth also managed a small clothing business. To boost her income, she worked as a dancer in a bar located in Zona Norte, a popular nightlife area for both tourists and locals. Like many women in her situation, Elizabeth was careful. She kept her family updated, especially when meeting clients. She shared her location, maintained communication, and trusted her instincts. This cautious habit would later play a crucial role in the effort to track her last movements. On February 14, 2022, Valentine's Day, Elizabeth seemed excited. She had lunch with her mother that afternoon, which turned out to be their last meal together. Later that evening, she had a second date with a man she had recently met at work. He was American. Elizabeth confided in her brother, expressing that while she was uncertain about him, her curiosity led her to give him another chance. Staying true to her usual habits, she promised to keep in touch, send updates, and share her location. Some reports indicate they met again at a bar, while others suggest she picked him up near a border crossing in her white SUV. They went to a Brazilian restaurant for dinner and then drove to a motel close to the beaches of Tijuana. Elizabeth informed her family that she would be gone for no more than 4 hours. At the start of the night, everything appeared normal. She kept sending her location, and her messages reassured her family about her safety. They knew where she was and who she was with. However, then the updates suddenly stopped. There were no more messages, no answered calls, and no signs that she was moving. This silence was not just worrisome, it was overwhelming. Her family's anxiety grew rapidly. The lack of communication was completely out of character for someone as careful and responsible as Elizabeth. It quickly became a clear sign that something was seriously wrong. As the hours went by, the feeling of dread intensified, marking the onset of a nightmare that no one was ready to face. When hours went by without any news of Elizabeth, her family didn't hesitate to take action. That same night, filled with fear and uncertainty, they started searching for her on their own. Their first stop was the bar where she worked, but the response they received was shocking. Elizabeth had not come in that day. Her concerned co-workers provided the family with an important lead, a detailed description of the man she was supposed to meet. They described him as overweight, with light brown skin and visible acne scars. He was a frequent customer at the bar, and although he didn't have a name, the description was detailed enough to help the family in their search. By February 15th, the family was increasingly worried due to the lack of news about Elizabeth. They decided to report her disappearance to local authorities, but encountered a common hurdle: bureaucracy. They were informed that they had to wait 24 hours before they could file an official report. Determined not to delay, they took to social media, creating pages, sharing photos, and soliciting the public's help. Despite their efforts, it felt as though Elizabeth and her white Jeep Liberty had completely disappeared. On February 16th, authorities officially expanded the report to include her missing vehicle. GPS tracking of Elizabeth's phone showed her movements, first to a Brazilian restaurant near the river, then to a motel, and finally to a park. The last recorded location was a downtown hotel in Tijuana. Her brother hurried there, but hotel staff denied him entry, and there was still no sign of Elizabeth or her Jeep. On Thursday, February 17th, her family used the vehicle's GPS history to track it to a street in Zona Norte. A sense of dread settled over them. Something was definitely wrong. Elizabeth's mother and brother drove directly to the location. Although the Jeep was there, Elizabeth was not. They called the police, and officers and firefighters arrived within minutes to secure the area. Their attention quickly turned to the trunk of the vehicle. What they discovered confirmed the worst fears of Elizabeth's family. Her lifeless body was inside, naked and curled up in a fetal position, exhibiting clear signs of violence. The heartbreaking scene devastated her family, leaving them in shock and disbelief. Elizabeth's family spoke out about her murder, the silence and inaction that preceded it. They highlighted a system that failed to respond when she went missing and the long wait for justice. The story quickly gained attention and sparked outrage throughout the city. Friends, co-workers, even strangers gathered at the scene. Elizabeth's body was taken to the forensic medical service for a complete autopsy. The findings were troubling. She had multiple blunt force injuries on her face, chest, and abdomen. A deep mark on her neck indicated an attempted strangulation. Additionally, there were signs of asphyxiation due to blockage of both her mouth and nose. Forensic experts determined that asphyxiation was the most likely cause of death. The investigation did not provide any information on possible abuse assault. Nonetheless, the case is officially categorized as a femicide, and an investigation is underway to find her murderer. The tragedy continued for the family after Elizabeth's passing. Just 3 days later, her mother suffered a sudden heart attack and died. Although the official cause was cardiac failure, many believed it was due to overwhelming grief that her body could not bear. As the family laid both mother and daughter to rest, the investigation picked up speed. Local and state authorities began to connect Elizabeth's case with others in the area. A frightening realization surfaced. This was not an isolated incident. The method of killing shared unsettling similarities with 2 other cases of young women who also worked in nightlife scene in Zona Norte. Karen, a 28-year-old mother from Veracruz, went missing on August 30th, 2021 after meeting a man at a motel. 3 days later, her body was discovered in a local garbage dump, showing obvious signs of violence. Karen had recently started working as a dancer and escort. She was careful about her safety, only meeting clients through direct phone calls. Before she left that day, she informed both a friend and a relative about her plans. Despite their quick efforts to find her, the situation ended in tragedy. Security cameras recorded the vehicle used by the man she met, and a friend later identified him from the video. However, surprisingly, no arrest warrant was issued, and the man remained at large. Angela Carolina Acosta Flores was only 20 years old when she was found dead in a hotel room on January 24, 2022, near the bar where Elizabeth worked. Like Elizabeth and Karen, Angela had gone to meet a man described as American and possibly of Hispanic descent. Her phone was missing from the crime scene, and when investigators traced it, they found it had been taken to Riverside, California, across the border. This discovery alarmed the investigators. 3 women had been brutally murdered, all linked by time, location, and method. Each case involved a mysterious man, likely American, and all 3 women were associated with the nightlife in the same area. They were killed within a 6-month period, leading to a troubling conclusion. There may be a serial killer targeting vulnerable women in Zona Norte. On Wednesday, November 16, 2022, the Baja California State Prosecutor held a highly anticipated press conference. With a room full of reporters and the nation watching, he confirmed a troubling presence. A serial killer was active in Tijuana. The prosecutor revealed that the suspect specifically targeted exotic dancers and escort who belonged to one of the city's most at-risk groups. His method was alarming. He would travel from the United States into Mexico, commit his crimes, and then escape back across the border, making it difficult for authorities to catch him. At that time, no additional details were shared to avoid compromising the investigation or alerting the suspect. Meanwhile, the manhunt for the killer was intensifying. Nearly a month later, on December 13th, The prosecutor held a second press conference. This time, the news was shocking. They had identified a suspect, an American citizen, whose psychological profile resembled that of Ted Bundy, one of the most notorious serial killers from the 1970s. However, there was a complication. The man had already left Mexico. Although a local arrest warrant was issued, it wasn't sufficient. Authorities sought a red notice from Interpol to enhance international cooperation. The FBI and U.S. consulates joined the search, and the suspect's physical description was made public to help locate him. Experts also conducted new forensic tests to ensure that no accomplices were missed. The breakthrough in the investigation came from detailed profiling. Investigators identified the man's methods. He targeted young women who were petite, attractive, and vulnerable. He portrayed himself as polite, respectful, and generous to gain their trust and lower their defenses. Once he had their confidence, he would lure them to secluded areas where he would then attack them. Each of the three known victims, Elizabeth Martinez, Karen, and Angela Carolina Acosta Flores, suffered extreme violence, with visible injuries primarily to their faces and chests. His method of asphyxiation was a defining characteristic. Two of the victims were found without clothes, while the third, although still dressed, had more injuries, indicating she may have fought back. This was not a crime of passion. It was deliberate, predatory, and systematic. Although these three cases gained media attention, they were not isolated. At the time of Elizabeth's disappearance, there were already rumors about other missing women with similar ages, professions, and unfortunate outcomes. Their stories have quietly faded away without resolution. As the investigation progressed, authorities were under pressure to act quickly. Although the suspect's identity remained confidential, local media labeled him as the Ted Bundy of Tijuana. His actual name was Bryant Rivera, a U.S. citizen with several known addresses in Southern California. Authorities searched these locations, but he was nowhere to be found. Family members described Bryant as working in e-commerce. Meanwhile, the Elizabeth's family was actively seeking justice for her. On February 14, 2023, marking 1 year since her murder, they revisited the site where her body was discovered and placed a floral tribute in the shape of a heart. Her brother spoke to reporters, expressing his deep sorrow and anger. A year had passed, and Bryant remained at large. The family's lawyer had been denied access to the case details, and the prosecutor's office had not provided any updates. Additionally, Elizabeth's Jeep Liberty, which was part of the crime scene, had yet to be returned. On July 6, 2023, Bryant was arrested in Los Angeles. The arrest took place calmly at his parents' home. However, he was only charged with the murder of Angela Carolina, while the murders of Karen and Elizabeth were not included in the U.S. charges, even though Mexico had made an active extradition request for all three cases. The Baja California prosecutor publicly confirmed Bryant's arrest, stating it was a result of collaboration between local and federal law enforcement agencies in the U.S. Bryant was assigned a public defender and requested bail. The judge denied the bail request, citing concerns about Bryant being a flight risk and a potential danger to women. He was ordered to remain in custody at Los Angeles County Jail. His family firmly rejected all allegations against him. His mother claimed he could never commit such acts of violence, and his sister even wrote a letter to support his character. However, the evidence suggested otherwise. On June 29, 2023, a federal judge in Los Angeles approved Mexico's request to extradite him. Family members of Angela were present at the hearing, along with the brother of Elizabeth. The courtroom was heavy with the sorrow of three grieving families. The judge emphasized that Bryant would remain in custody. As of June 2025, the extradition process is still ongoing. Legal experts estimate it could take up to 2 years to complete. If convicted of all three murders, Bryant could potentially face a total of 180 years in prison. However, due to Mexican law, the maximum sentence he could actually serve is 50 years. In addition, Mexican prosecutors have suggested that Bryant might be connected to a fourth victim, prompting them to investigate unsolved cases of missing women. Investigators are also re-examining surveillance footage from hotels and motels to determine if this predator has been active for a longer period than initially suspected. The situation surrounding Elizabeth has evolved from a personal tragedy to a representation of a larger national issue. Her death, along with the deaths of Karen and Angela, underscores the serious stigma and disregard that women in the escort industry encounter. When Elizabeth went missing, authorities did not intervene. Instead, it was her family who located her. It was her online activity, rather than official procedures, that ultimately pointed to her killer. Even now, despite an arrest, justice has not been achieved. The murder of Elizabeth Martinez Figueroa is a heartbreaking reminder of the vulnerabilities faced by women in Tijuana's nightlife and the devastating consequences of a system that too often fails them. Her vibrant spirit, her dreams of a brighter future, and her deep bond with her family were cruelly extinguished, leaving a void that echoes through her community. The cases of Elizabeth, Karen, and Angela reveal a chilling pattern of violence that demands urgent action. As Bryant Rivera's extradition process drags on, Elizabeth's family and countless others continue their relentless pursuit of justice, refusing to let her story fade into silence. This tragedy is not just a personal loss, but a rallying cry to confront the stigma, neglect, and impunity that perpetuate such crimes. Yvonne Lohr dreamed of discovering the world, feeling free, exploring ancient lands, and sharing joyful selfies from the farthest corners of the earth. Then, on a bright morning in Egypt, everything changed. After a series of frantic text messages, there was only silence. This is the story of Yvonne Lohr, a daughter, a sister, a traveler. A group of tourists, including her, goes missing under shocking circumstances, need unraveling a mysterious plot far from home. Yvonne Lohr was born on May 11, 2000 in Colombia. She is the eldest daughter of Mary Sanchez and Diego Lohr, and grew up with her younger brother, with whom she shared a strong and inseparable bond. Although little is known about her early life, it is clear that, as an adult, Yvonne made a courageous choice. She moved to Europe in hopes of a brighter future. She settled in Barcelona, Spain. Her friends and family described her as strong, very sensitive, and extremely loyal. She cared deeply for her loved ones and supported her family in Colombia by working multiple jobs, sometimes holding as many as 3 at the same time. Although her exact positions in Spain are not clear, her determination to support others was unquestionable. Yvonne loved adventure, and her social media accounts were filled with photos from her travels, showcasing her independence and lively spirit. In April 2025, Yvonne organized a trip that would turn out to be her most unforgettable adventure, and also her last. This time, she wouldn't be traveling alone. Her close friend Stefania Bedoya, a Colombian woman 5 years older than her, would be joining her. Stefania became well known in Colombia after winning the title of Miss Antioquia in the 2023-2024 pageant. She had been trained as a flight attendant and was currently working in digital marketing and modeling. Yvonne Lohr and her close friend Stefania Bedoya had planned the trip in advance with great anticipation. Stefania arrived in Barcelona on April 15th. After spending a few days together, they flew to Cairo, Egypt, on April 24th. Why Egypt? The choice of destination was intentional. Both had tickets to Samna, one of the region's largest electronic music festivals, which was scheduled for April 25th and 26th. For Yvonne, the timing couldn't have been better. She was about to celebrate her 25th birthday in the most exciting way she could imagine, dancing under the stars in a new country. The festival began with happiness music, dancing, laughter, and meeting new people. That was when they met Jessie Escobar. Jessie introduced herself at the event and was accompanied by 2 men, whom she also introduced as her friends. The 5 seemed to connect naturally and easily. Soon, the girls and their new friends began spending more and more time together. Yvonne, always open and spontaneous, shared stories about their night on Instagram. In her videos from Friday night, April 25th, she appeared radiant and joyful, surrounded by vibrant lights and lively energy. By that point, the girls trusted Jessie enough that, when she asked for the address of their hotel, they gave it to her. Jessie told them she would pick them up on April 27th at 9 a.m. to take them to another party, Everything changed on the morning of April 27th. At about 11:04 a.m., Yvonne started sending urgent messages to her family. But these weren't her usual cheerful updates, they were warnings. She wrote that someone was trying to hurt them and wanted to take them away by force. She shared her live location and urgently asked for help. In another message, she pleaded for the police to get involved. She said there were men outside their room and more cars were arriving. Every word was filled with panic. Despite her distress, Yvonne quickly contacted a friend in Spain. This time, she spoke openly and without hesitation. She said clearly, "If anything happens to me, I hold a woman on social media named Mescore1020 responsible." She sent a screenshot of the profile. Investigators later confirmed what the message suggested. Mescore 2020 was Jessie, the woman they had met at the festival. Then everything went silent. Yvonne stopped answering messages. Her phone was turned off, and her family never heard from her again. As more time passed without any news from Yvonne after her last message, her family became increasingly worried. One call after another went unanswered. What frightened them even more was that Stefania had also gone silent. 2 days passed. On April 29th, there was finally a small update. The family managed to get in touch with a woman named Natalia, who knew both parties. Natalia confirmed that Stefania was alive and staying at a hotel. This brought relief, but it was only temporary. Stefania didn't contact Yvonne's family directly until the following day, April 30th. Her words turned their world upside down. Yvonne was in intensive care and in a coma. There was no explanation or further details, just this stark, simple fact. Yvonne's parents were shocked by how calm Stefania sounded. No one seemed panicked. Everything remained calm, and no one hurried to explain things to them. This wasn't how a close friend would react, especially not someone who had traveled around the world with her. But the odd events continued. For several days, Stefania would not reveal which hospital it was. No location was shared, no photos were uploaded, and no updates were provided. The family felt isolated by distance and language barriers, unable to get help or clear information as time quickly slipped away. Yvonne's family began searching frantically. They contacted all the hospitals, clinics, and emergency rooms in Cairo. After many attempts and several formal requests, they finally received confirmation that Yvonne was in a public hospital. Her condition was very serious. She had several broken bones and needed a ventilator to help her breathe. The doctors said that her brain activity and vital signs were almost undetectable. When faced with something unimaginable, her family did everything they could. They started a fundraising campaign to collect donations for Mary, Yvonne's mother, so she could travel to Egypt and support her daughter. The response was incredible, coming from friends, strangers, Colombians, and compassionate people worldwide. Thanks to the generous donations, Mary was able to quickly book a flight, hurrying toward a reunion she had never expected to happen in this way. There was still a glimmer of hope, the chance to move Yvonne to Spain for specialized treatment, and the thought that she might survive after all. But that hope quickly faded. Yvonne passed away on May 4th, 2025, after spending 8 days in a coma. Her injuries were too severe, and the trauma was too great for her body to recover. Her family was heartbroken and overwhelmed, but they couldn't grieve, not yet. They wanted to know the truth. They began urging the governments of Egypt and Colombia to conduct a prompt and transparent investigation. The family wanted to understand what had happened in the last hours of their daughter's life. The messages Yvonne sent before disappearing were soon discovered, revealing unsettling information. In one message, Yvonne warned that the men she was with claimed to be producers and promised to make her a star in the music industry. This was not true. Her family also revealed that these men were only known by their nicknames, El Serbio and El Doctor. Then, something unexpected happened. I had a conversation with Stefania. Stefania stated that Yvonne had fallen from a significant height when she was not there. But that was only the beginning of a series of contradictions. Over time, Stefania's account of what happened started to change. At first, the differences were subtle, but they gradually became more noticeable. With each new version, there were more questions than answers. Egyptian authorities said they had started an investigation. They stated that Stefania had been questioned and that attempts were being made to find Jesse and the two unidentified men. However, there were still no tangible outcomes, no arrests, no clues, and no resolution. Yvonne's family looked on in shock as the investigation began to lose momentum. They publicly accused both the Egyptian authorities and the Colombian consulate of negligence, making their claims widely known on both continents. From the beginning, they encountered indifference, delays, and a lack of support. Time was running out. The investigation was progressing too slowly. Meanwhile, they faced another difficult challenge. Yvonne's body was still in Egypt. The family didn't have enough money to bring her home, so they appealed to the public for help once again. A second fundraising campaign was launched, not only to seek justice, but also to give people the opportunity to say goodbye. As the days passed without any answers, Yvonne's family and friends were overwhelmed by a harsh truth. Those responsible for explaining what happened either remained silent or, even more troubling, continued to give conflicting accounts. Her loved ones reached out to the public as a last resort. They launched a widespread campaign on social media and in the news, not to assign blame, but to ensure that no other case would go unnoticed. They wanted to know the truth. They needed to know why Yvonne died and who was with her when it happened. On Tuesday, May 6th, a powerful new voice joined the fight for justice. Angie Giraldo, a close friend of Yvonne's, posted a 5-minute video that quickly went viral on the internet. She pointed out troubling contradictions in Stefania's earlier statements and also presented important new evidence. Angie's message was not only one of grief, but also a plea for clarity, truth, and for the world to reflect on Yvonne's final moments. The video spread rapidly on social media, sparking renewed public outrage and stronger calls for a thorough investigation. Angie explained her case clearly, providing screenshots, photos, and video clips. She said these were first posted by Stefania on social media, but were later deleted for unknown reasons. Luckily, those posts were saved. This material provides a more complete view, showing parts of the girls' trip and their interactions following the incident that left Yvonne fighting for her life. The findings contradicted the official accounts. They raised questions about the timeline, the people involved, and the overall story that was being presented. Based on the evidence Angie gathered and presented, Stefania and Jesse were the two women most involved in the situation. Neither of them was able to give a clear or consistent explanation of what happened. Both their public and private statements were inconsistent, often containing gaps and contradictions. Neither woman could provide a clear timeline, explain how Yvonne was injured, or give a logical account of events from beginning to end. Instead of providing clarity, their statements only created more confusion. As a result, confusion increased, suspicion intensified, and people around the world began paying closer attention. Stefania herself exhibited some of the most troubling inconsistencies. Angie included social media posts that Stefania had shared after the incident, and these posts appeared to be completely out of touch with reality. At one point, Stefania casually mentioned to a friend that she planned to eat at a luxury restaurant in Cairo, even though, at that same time, Yvonne was in the hospital in critical condition, fighting for her life. Despite everything, Stefania seemed unconcerned. The tone of her messages angered people, who wondered why she was not showing any sadness, urgency, or compassion. As these details came to light, more people began to doubt Stefania's involvement and to wonder if she had been completely honest. Stefania's actions were concerning, but Jesse's reaction was equally troubling, urgently seeking answers. Yvonne's family reached out to Jesse personally, hoping she could provide a clear explanation, something that would bring them peace, or at least help them understand. Instead, they received unclear answers, evasive voice messages, and even more conflicting statements. Jessie never provided a specific timeline. She spoke vaguely and did not seem concerned. Her account did not clarify or explain what actually happened that night. Her hesitation led people to become more distrustful and increasingly believe that important information was being withheld. In another leaked conversation, Stefania was overheard advising someone to remain calm and to follow all instructions. She referred to what happened to Yvonne merely as a difficult situation, without providing any details or showing any concern. To Yvonne's loved ones, these reactions did not indicate fear or trauma, but rather a sense of detachment, which only made them more suspicious. Let's remember that Stefania initially told the family that Yvonne had fallen from a high place. She claimed that she was not present during the incident and only learned about it afterwards. However, there were significant gaps in her account. She could not specify where the fall had taken place, when it had happened, or how Yvonne had been discovered. Her unclear story was already falling apart, and as more evidence emerged, her silence seemed less like confusion and more like she was hiding something. In a video that Stefania later deleted from social media, she said she was leaving a hotel in Cairo because she believed that a human trafficking ring was operating there. She claimed that she had been rescued and was now receiving threats, although she showed no visible injuries. Later, she gave a completely different version of what had happened. In this new statement, Stefania confirmed that she was with Yvonne when everything occurred. She mentioned both of them. As they were walking down the street, Jesse and two unidentified men were behind them. Stefania said that Yvonne began to panic and showed obvious signs of anxiety. Stefania tried to calm her down, but then, according to Stefania, Yvonne went ahead on her own to look for a safe place. Stefania said she took a taxi to try to catch up, but when she reached the spot where she expected to find Yvonne was no longer there. She said that was the moment when everything fell apart. Once again, nothing matched up. The timeline was unclear, and the locations were not specified. To make things even more confusing, Stefania later reported that Yvonne had been found with several broken bones. All of her belongings were still with her except for her passport, which was missing. Another warning sign, another unanswered question. Stefania said she felt completely broken, both emotionally and physically, as she tried to express how devastated she was. However, it was already too late to change what had happened. When those videos were released, social media erupted with activity. People began investigating the backgrounds of both Stefania and Jesse. Rumors circulated about Jesse. Some people accused her of being involved with human trafficking networks, while others claimed she had lived and worked in countries such as Germany and Turkey, specifically mentioning Ankara. Additionally, there were allegations that she had appeared on escort websites. At the same time, Stefania's name resurfaced in reports about her disagreements with Colombian brands, lingering issues from her participation in beauty pageants, and controversies within the modeling industry. Although none of these allegations were ever officially confirmed, rumors and speculation spread widely. As online pressure increased, both women made their social media profiles private, effectively bringing the case to a standstill. To this day, Yvonne's family has not received any clear or official updates from the Egyptian authorities or any government agency. No official communication has been made. This goes beyond negligence. It is outright abandonment. Many international reports warn that Egypt is a high-risk destination for women traveling alone. There are serious and increasing dangers, such as widespread gender-based violence and a largely hidden trafficking crisis. Refugees and migrants, particularly women, are vulnerable to exploitation. Yvonne, a Colombian woman far from home, found herself trapped in this dangerous situation. In Colombia, Yvonne's friends and family continue their fight. Their fundraiser is still ongoing. Although they have raised a substantial amount, it is still not enough to cover the significant expenses caused by this tragedy. Her family suffers from unbearable pain not knowing what happened to her in her final moments. Why do the people who were with her keep changing their stories? And why is no one, including the authorities, willing to tell the whole truth? This is one of the most unsettling cases we've discussed. A young woman died while overseas, and her friends either cannot or will not explain how it happened. The authorities are ignoring the situation. Governments remain silent, and life continues as usual. But her family cannot move on. They deserve honesty and clarity, not just rumors or conflicting information. They have a right to know the truth. They deserve justice in Yvonne Lore's case. As the sun set over Veracruz, Sylvia Jasmin got into her red car after enjoying a relaxing pedicure. She had just shared a warm meal with her mom and hoped to be home for dinner. Everything seemed normal. She parked by a quiet bus terminal, unaware that someone was watching her closely. The evening felt familiar calm. Then, suddenly, something happened. Hours later, Sylvia had vanished. Sylvia Jazmín Armendariz Alpuche was born in 1994 in a city in Veracruz, Mexico. She was the only daughter of Jose, an engineer in the oil industry, and Sylvia Alpuche, a dedicated homemaker who focused on raising her daughter. From a young age, Sylvia excelled academically. Thanks to her family's stable financial situation, she was able to attend a good school and fully embrace the opportunity. In addition to her academic success, Sylvia demonstrated exceptional talent in drawing and public speaking, receiving many awards during her school years. After graduating from high school, she studied industrial engineering in Mexico City. She also had a strong interest in languages. Through her determination and hard work, she became certified in both English and French, which provided her with opportunities that many only dream of. As a young adult, Sylvia gained independence and started her professional career at a large state-owned company in the petroleum and natural gas industry. However, her life wasn't solely about work and ambition. She cherished moments with her family, her close friends, and her 3 dogs. Like many young women, she envisioned getting married and starting a family one day. This dream began to take shape when she met a young man named Aldo. Aldo and Sylvia's life together is not well documented. Some sources indicate they met at work, while others believe it was at a gym. Regardless of the circumstances, they began dating. However, their relationship deteriorated quickly as Aldo became possessive and controlling, which conflicted with Sylvia's independent and determined personality. They eventually broke up between May and June of 2019. Sylvia moved on, concentrating on her personal goals and the life she was creating. On August 14, 2019, everything changed. That morning began just like any other day. Sylvia had breakfast with her mother, and later, they enjoyed lunch together, a tradition they both cherished. This would unknowingly be their last meal together. At around 4:30 p.m., Sylvia left home in her red car for a pedicure appointment downtown. Shortly after, she sent her mother a picture of her freshly painted toenails, assuring her she would be back in time for dinner. However, as night fell, Sylvia did not return home. Her mother became increasingly anxious and tried calling her, but there was no answer. She sent messages to find out if Sylvia's plans had changed. The response she received felt off. It lacked the usual warmth and affection that Sylvia always expressed, filling her with a sense of dread. By the early morning hour, her initial unease had escalated into a full-blown panic. She reached out to her family, hoping that someone might have seen or heard from Sylvia, but no one had. In a last attempt to find answers, she contacted Sylvia's friends, including Andrea, her daughter's closest friend. Andrea, who was also 25 and from Veracruz, had an impressive background like Sylvia's. She had excelled academically and earned a degree in petroleum engineering. Andrea specialized in oil well productivity, held multiple certifications, including one in English, and even started her own business in 2018. She was engaged and in the midst of planning her wedding. Despite their hectic schedules, Andrea and Sylvia remained close friends. Their bond started in preschool and grew stronger throughout high school, making them feel like sisters. On August 15th, Andrea told Sylvia's mother that she had talked to Sylvia the day before, but had not been in touch since. Worried, Sylvia's mother asked Andrea to call Aldo, as she had been blocked by him. Andrea reached out, but Aldo said he hadn't spoken to Sylvia in more than a week. His indifferent response did not help alleviate anyone's worries. As the hours went by without any news from Sylvia, her parents' initial concern turned into deep worry. They ultimately decided to report her missing at the local police station. Shortly after filing the report, the police found Sylvia's red car parked near a bus terminal, but there was no sign of her. Time passed slowly until a call from an oil company worker led to a shocking discovery. While clearing an area near the pipelines, workers noticed human remains discarded in a makeshift dump by Cosoleacaque Nueva Tiapa Highway in southern Veracruz. When the police arrived, they found a disturbing scene. The only identifiable remains were 2 lower legs, clearly belonging to a woman. The rest of the body had been severely burned and was unrecognizable. Investigators only had the legs to identify the victim, so they contacted Sylvia's parents. When her mother saw a photograph of the remains, she instantly recognized them as her daughter's due to the nail design, which matched a photo Sylvia had sent her just hours before she went missing. However, forensic verification was essential. The remains were sent to the medical examiner, and DNA results a few days later confirmed the heartbreaking truth. The body was that of 25-year-old Sylvia. The forensic analysis revealed a horrific scenario. Sylvia had been shot in the head, but the bullet wound alone was not the cause of death. Experts determined that she had died after being set on fire while still alive, wrapped in flammable plastic bags, which explained why her lower legs had not entirely burned. Armed with this disturbing evidence, investigators began to look into Sylvia's social life. During their discussions with family and friends, one name kept coming up: Aldo Castellan, her ex-boyfriend. Their breakup had been due to his possessiveness and jealousy, raising immediate concerns. When the police attempted to find Aldo, he had disappeared. His family claimed they did not know his whereabouts. This led to increasing suspicion that he had not simply vanished, but had received assistance to escape. Online speculation surged, filled with alleged sightings and rumors about where he might be. Meanwhile, Sylvia's family prepared for her burial, mourning deeply as they laid her to rest at the local cemetery. Her parents, heartbroken, struggled to comprehend how their lively and accomplished daughter had met such a tragic fate. As the investigation into Aldo escalated, authorities learned troubling details about his background. Just before Sylvia's murder, he had taken a 30-day leave from work. He also deleted all his social media accounts and severed connections with his former friends and acquaintances. His history was alarming. During his time as a student, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia and frequently exhibited aggressive behavior. He often arrived at school armed and confronted classmates aggressively. Despite numerous concerns voiced by people at his university, he faced no repercussions, reportedly protected by his father, who was also known for his explosive temper. Further investigation showed that Aldo escaped using an ambulance from the state-owned petroleum company where Sylvia worked. He reportedly received help from an uncle in planning his escape. In response to this elusive and potentially dangerous fugitive, the Attorney General's office announced a reward of 400,000 pesos for any information that could lead to his capture. Meanwhile, Sylvia's mother channeled her grief into activism. She organized rallies, distributed flyers featuring Sylvia's photo, and demanded justice. Her efforts joined a growing movement of families in Mexico, determined to ensure their daughters' stories are not forgotten. When the global issue began in early 2020, leading to lockdowns and restrictions, Sylvia's family and supporters quickly adapted. They utilized social media to organize virtual campaigns and protests, determined to keep her case in the public eye. For several months, there was no progress in the investigation. However, on July 14, 2020, nearly a year after Sylvia's death, there was a significant breakthrough. Aldo, now 32, was arrested. Officials attributed his capture to diligent investigative efforts, while media outlets suggested it was a stroke of luck. Police had received an anonymous tip about a man causing a disturbance at a public transport stop. When officers arrived to question him, he brandished a knife but was subdued and identified as the fugitive. Upon confirming his identity, authorities noted that there was an active warrant for his arrest for the femicide of Sylvia. While in hiding, Aldo took many steps to avoid being found. He lived in a well-supplied home that helped him stay hidden for several months. He also changed his appearance a lot by gaining weight and growing his hair long. When he was finally questioned, he claimed not to know Sylvia, but it didn't take long for his lie to fall apart. Aldo was arrested and moved to a social reintegration center, where he was formally charged with Sylvia's murder and with attempting to destroy evidence by burning her remains. Soon after his arrest, his mother shared a letter online declaring her son's innocence. She argued that there was no solid evidence against him and suggested that he was being unfairly targeted simply because he was Sylvia's ex-partner. In her statement, she claimed that Aldo had suffered physical abuse at the hands of the police, who she accused of trying to coerce a confession. She also criticized law enforcement for not exploring other potential leads in the case. While she expressed compassion for Sylvia's family, She pledged to advocate for what she believes to be the truth about her son. Aldo's mother said her son had gone into hiding for nearly a year because their family was receiving death threats. When Aldo was found, it brought relief to Sylvia's family and friends, as many thought the case was close to being resolved and that justice was finally coming. However, just when it seemed closure was within reach, unexpected news changed everything. On December 3, 2020, the police arrested Andrea, Sylvia's lifelong best friend, in connection with the crime. This news shocked Sylvia's family and the community. Andrea was a key advocate for justice, even providing the crucial voice message in which Sylvia identified Aldo as her potential killer. She supported Sylvia's mother during protests, allowed her phone to be analyzed for evidence, and was widely recognized as a vital force in maintaining attention on the case. However, authorities accused her of involvement in the crime, stating they had strong evidence against her. Prosecutors reported that several protected witnesses came forward, with one claiming that Andrea had been secretly involved with Aldo while he was with Sylvia. These allegations caused distress among those who knew both women. Andrea rejected all accusations, insisting that she had been in a serious relationship with another man she intended to marry before her arrest disrupted those plans. She provided a detailed account of her activities on the day Sylvia went missing. She claimed she had visited a spa, forgot her wallet, and called her mother to bring it to her. Her mother confirmed that they returned home together around 8:30 p.m. However, cell tower data contradicted their story. Analysis of the phones belonging to Sylvia, Aldo, and Andrea showed that all three were at the same location around the time the crime likely happened. This discovery led to new protests, this time initiated by Andrea's parents, who argued that their daughter was being wrongly accused for not testifying against Aldo. By early 2021, Aldo and Andrea started sharing their perspectives on the situation through letters and social media posts from their detention centers. In one handwritten note, Andrea expressed her gratitude to those supporting her and her family. She hoped that the prosecution would take a closer look at the evidence and reconsider the possibility of a mistake. Meanwhile, Andrea's parents initiated a social media campaign to share photos, documents, and her side of the story. They also called for the anonymous witnesses who accused her to be revealed, arguing that transparency is crucial for ensuring a fair trial. Despite their efforts, the outcome remained unchanged. In September 2022, after a long and emotionally intense trial, 27-year-old Andrea was found guilty of murdering Sylvia and sentenced to 70 years in prison. The judge referred to the so-called overwhelming evidence, especially the geolocation data from Andrea's phone, which showed she was at the crime scene during the crucial time. For Sylvia's parents, the verdict provided some legal closure, but it did not bring peace. Meanwhile, one for Andrea's family, this verdict marked the start of a new struggle, one against a sentence they believe was based on flawed evidence. Andrea's defense attorney criticized both the prosecution and the judge, arguing that the trial was affected by inconsistencies and weak evidence. From the defense's viewpoint, Andrea was condemned not for any proven involvement in the crime, but for her refusal to testify against Aldo. Although she knew about the violent relationship between Sylvia and Aldo, Andrea had never seen the crime occur and lacked concrete proof to blame anyone. Her mother publicly condemned what she called a flawed investigation, highlighting that, even though 4 alleged eyewitnesses came forward a year after the crime, none had actually witnessed the event take place. There was no solid proof of a romantic relationship between Andrea and Aldo, which prosecutors used to suggest they were involved together. The main issue was the cell phone geolocation data. Prosecutors argued that this data placed Andrea at the crime scene and claimed it came from her phone. Meanwhile, the lawyer argued that Andrea was being unfairly blamed, serving as a convenient scapegoat for a public demanding justice. After the investigators struggled to create a solid case against Aldo, they shifted their focus to Andrea, perhaps to avoid confronting their shortcomings. In November 2022, Andrea's legal team filed an appeal with the Superior Court, seeking to have her conviction overturned. They also requested an investigation into possible abuses of power and political interference, highlighting actions by the then governor of Veracruz. Andrea's family was hopeful that the higher court would act fairly and give her a chance to demonstrate her innocence. After nearly 2 years, Andrea achieved a significant breakthrough. She was granted a federal writ of protection, a legal order from the federal courts. The court determined that her trial had serious procedural issues. The federal court has ordered a new trial, which allows previously withheld evidence to be presented. This decision gives Andrea a fresh opportunity to prove her innocence and possibly regain her freedom. The most recent development in Andrea's case took place on April 21, 2025, during an important hearing. Her mother reported that the new defense team introduced verified geolocation data connected to Andrea's actual phone evidence that had inexplicably been left out during her first trial. This data challenges the prosecution's claims and could undermine the basis of the original conviction. However, as of May 2025, Andrea's release had not been officially decided. At the same time, Aldo's legal proceedings were facing significant delays, and official records showed that his trial had not yet started. Despite several requests from his defense team for house arrest, a judge upheld his preventive detention in 2024. By March 2025, Sylvia's mother, along with friends and supporters, organized a protest calling for Aldo to be put on trial. During the protest, she raised concerns about why the accused had not yet faced justice while in custody. The prosecutor's office provided vague explanations, mentioning that procedural delays were due to ongoing legal appeals. Sylvia's case has become emblematic of the fight for justice in a country plagued by gender-based violence, which continues to affect many lives. What originally seemed to be a closed case has now raised serious issues about due process, corruption, and the impact of delayed justice. The ongoing debate questions whether Andrea was truly involved in her friend's murder or if she is an innocent victim caught in a broken legal system. Should Andrea be released? She is innocent or guilty?
Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Lauren Johansson. That evening, it was quite quiet. A light wind rustled the treetops near the cemetery by the Wolf River. A car sat on the side of an abandoned road, motionless and untouched for hours. But something was wrong. When the police arrived, a man jumped out and ran into the woods. The officers rushed after him, but the thick undergrowth, the dark night, and the uneven ground prevented them from catching the fugitive. Meanwhile, Robert Lance Johansson, Lauren's father, broke past the police, his heart pounding. His daughter had been missing for days, and now her car was right in front of him. He ran up to the door and took a deep breath. What he saw inside changed everything. Lauren Johansson was born on October 30, 2001, in Ocean Springs, a quiet and picturesque town. The town attracted tourists with its green alleys, cozy beaches, and beautiful landscapes. But for Lauren, it was not just a place on the map, it was her home. Here, she grew up, surrounded by the love of her family. It was where she learned to be strong. Lauren grew up in a family where caring for others was part of life. Her parents, Lance and Tamala Robinson Johansson, surrounded their daughter with warmth. However, their life was not easy. Both of her older sisters had serious health problems, and from childhood, Lauren helped her parents take care of them. It was then that she learned patience and compassion, qualities that became part of her character. She was always ready to come to the rescue. She never complained and always put others before her own needs. From childhood, Lauren adored animals and was fascinated by wild birds. Her parents supported her hobby, and when Lauren became a teenager, she began to actively help in animal shelters. She looked after homeless cats and cared for horses after injuries. She treated wild animals and made it her life's goal to open her own shelter for rescued animals, to help those who could not help themselves. For this, she saved every cent, working since school. Lauren always wanted to help not only animals but also people. That's why she decided to become a nurse. She attended the University of Southern Mississippi and was successful in her studies despite working part-time jobs. Not only that, she also wanted to combine her studies with volunteer work. She worked day and night because she wanted to change the world for the better. In her senior year of high school, Lauren met Bryson Rivers. He was an athlete admired by everyone, raised in a religious and conservative family. As the eldest son, he carried a great responsibility since childhood, learning about discipline, respect for elders, and leadership qualities. He achieved success in sports, especially in football and athletics. Loved by teachers and admired by classmates, it seemed that he and Lauren were the ideal couple, supporting each other's dreams, they appearing happier than anyone else. However, this outer ideal hid a terrible truth, one that led to that night when they found her car on an abandoned road. At the beginning of their relationship, Bryson seemed caring and attentive. He showed interest in her life, listened to her daily experiences, and supported her dreams. Lauren appreciated his care. Bryson was proud of her kindness and determination. But over time, his care turned into obsessive control. At first, he just wanted to spend more time with her. Then he began to get jealous, asking more and more questions and urging her to communicate less with others. Soon, this behavior became a requirement. Lauren's friends noticed that she had changed. She began to avoid parties and meetings, stopped discussing Bryson. If someone asked about him, she justified his behavior, even when it became more manipulative. Lauren convinced herself that it was all because of love. Bryson had agitated outbursts of aggression mixed with displays of affection. If she tried to set boundaries, he would create a scene, only to apologize later and convince her it was for the sake of their future. He pressed on her feelings of guilt, saying she was the one provoking his jealousy. She didn't understand that she was in a toxic cycle. He would shout, then apologize, promising that everything would change, only for history to repeat itself. Later, when she told her friends, she tried to justify him, but they saw that she had changed. She became quieter, talked less about her feelings, and justified his actions more and more. He abruptly cut her off during public conversations, and when someone paid attention to her, he would react negatively. One time, when Lauren simply thanked a waiter for good service, Bryson's face changed immediately, and he spent the rest of the evening making sarcastic comments. She felt guilty even though she had done nothing wrong. Lance, her father, felt that something was wrong. He was worried and tried to talk to his daughter, but she brushed him off. Over time, she became more and more withdrawn. She didn't realize that she was no longer in control of her life. By December 2023, Lauren and Bryson were planning a trip, which she thought would be a romantic getaway, but he saw it as an opportunity to tighten his grip. Bryson was on leave from the army, and Lauren was on winter break from college. She wanted a change of scenery, while he wanted to isolate her. At first, everything seemed perfect. They walked around the city, visited the sights, and ate dinner at nice restaurants. Bryson seemed calm, but underneath the surface of this happiness, there was tension. Lauren felt this but ignored it. She believed that everything would be fine. On December 11th, Lauren and Bryson went to a bar to watch a football match. For Bryson, it was an important evening, and he was not going to miss it. At first, things were going quietly, but as soon as Lauren went to the restroom, the situation suddenly changed. She asked the waiter where the restroom was and left. A minute later, the same waiter accidentally walked down the same corridor, not even suspecting the effect this would have on Bryson. When Lauren returned to the table, she immediately felt that something was wrong. Bryson was tense, his gaze was harsh, and his voice was sharp. The more Lauren tried to calm him down, the worse it became. His accusations grew more absurd, her voice got louder, and his anger intensified. The people in the bar noticed the tension, but no one intervened. They left before anything serious could happen, but the real nightmare was just beginning. As soon as they got into the car, Bryson immediately locked the doors. He turned off the sound on her phone, snatched it, and put it in his pocket. Lauren was trapped. Bryson screamed and raged at her without explaining where he was taking her, but he continued to hit and intimidate her. His threats became more and more terrifying. Lauren was shaking with fear when the car stopped at a deserted park. She understood he wasn't going to let her go just like that. Lauren carried a gun in her bag just in case she tried to get it, but Bryson was faster. He snatched the bag from her hands. Now, she had no chance to save herself. For the next hour, he continued to hit her, speaking with frightening coldness. He smirked and said, "Her face now looks like a bowling ball." This phrase was accidentally recorded on her phone. At some point, Bryson made a mistake. He called his mother and screamed into the phone for help. Hearing Lauren's screams, his mother immediately called the police. Meanwhile, Lauren's father saw her location on the family GPS tracking. The police were already on their way. The officers heard her screams coming from the locked car, broke down the door, and saw Lauren beaten, shaking, with a swollen face, marks all over her body. Bryson was arrested shortly afterwards. Lauren was taken to the hospital. Her injuries were serious, and doctors were shocked by the level of violence she had suffered. Despite everything she had been through, Lauren didn't want to ruin his life. She refused to press charges. Even from jail, Bryson found ways to contact her. Every time, he said the same thing: "Forgive me, I will change, I need you," and part of her wanted to believe him. She changed her testimony to mitigate his guilt, but it was a mistake that changed the course of the whole case. Bryson remained in custody awaiting trial. The evidence against him was overwhelming: audio recordings from Lauren's phone, her initial testimony, and doctors' reports of her injuries. The court set bail at $250,000, which kept him behind bars temporarily. After 6 months, lawyers asked for the amount to be reduced. The judge agreed and reduced the bail to $150,000. Lauren's family was in shock. They knew that if he got out, Lauren would be in danger. But Bryson's mother quickly raised the money, and he was released while awaiting trial. After his release, Bryson was required to wear a GPS bracelet. He was forbidden to approach Lauren, write, or call her. Soon, a more serious situation arose. A few days after his release, Bryson's bracelet battery began to run low. He received several warnings about the need to charge it, but he ignored them. Eventually, the device completely discharged and became useless. The system immediately recorded a failure, and the authorities were alerted. However, they did not take urgent measures. Instead of responding immediately, they wasted hours and then a whole day without taking any action. No one reported it. He was again at large without supervision. Lance, Lauren's father, found out about it only through a voicemail from the police, in which they calmly informed him that Bryson had disappeared. They didn't even tell him exactly when it had happened. Robert was furious. He immediately called the police demanding action, but the police still dragged their feet. Hours passed, then days, and Bryson was on the run. Then Lauren disappeared. On July 2, 2024, Lance tried to call her, but the phone was silent. Soon, he received a strange message from her number. The text seemed alien, as if it hadn't been written by her. Lance felt a cold fear. He immediately called his other daughter, Caitlin, who lived with Lauren, and asked her to check if everything was okay. What she saw made her immediately call her father. The door to their apartment was wide open, all the security cameras were turned off, and Lauren's car was gone. Lance immediately reported his daughter missing, but the police hesitated again. A day passed before they finally agreed to track her car. On July 3, 2024, the police finally tracked Lauren's GPS. Her car was found in a remote area near the cemetery by the Wolf River. It was an isolated area surrounded by thick forest, far from busy roads. Lance rushed there as soon as he found out. When the officers approached the car, a man suddenly jumped out and rushed into the forest. It was Bryson Rivers. The police chased after him, but he disappeared among the trees. Lance, frantic with fear, rushed to the car. He opened the door, saw Lauren was lying in the back seat, her body wrapped in black plastic bags, her face and head covered. As a doctor, he had seen many terrible injuries, but nothing could prepare him for this. The police began to record evidence, but one thing was clear: this was not just a murder, it was a brutal, monstrous massacre. When forensic experts began to examine the car, they were confronted with a terrible sight. Blood stains on the upholstery indicated that Lauren had been subjected to a brutal and prolonged attack until her death. Lance was unable to leave the crime scene even when his health began to deteriorate from the stress he had experienced. He refused to leave until the investigators had finished their work. The search for Bryson continued for several hours, with helicopters equipped with thermal imaging scanning the forest for the slightest trace. Finally, a thermal signal was recorded, and the police surrounded him from all sides. After 9 hours of searching, Bryson was detained. He did not resist, his face remained calm, as if he did not realize what he had done. During interrogation, Bryson tried to give his version of events. He admitted that he came to Lauren's house that day knowing that she would be alone. He was angry that she no longer answered his calls. He waited for her to come out and then approached her. According to him, he just wanted to talk, but when Lauren refused and tried to leave, he grabbed her, dragged her into the car. She struggled, but he locked the doors and drove away. He took her to a deserted place outside the city, convinced that they needed to talk alone, but the conversation quickly turned into an argument. Lauren demanded that he let her go and threatened to call the police, which made him even angrier. He started yelling, blaming her for all their problems and for their breakup. When she tried to open the door and run out, he pushed her back into the car. He claims he was just trying to calm her down, but he hit her until she stopped moving. When he realized Lauren wasn't breathing, he tried to bring her to her senses, but it was too late. Realizing she was dead, he made a conscious decision. He took a blanket from the trunk, wrapped her body, and put it in the back seat. He then drove her to the cemetery by the Wolf River, where he left the car, planning to return later to get rid of the evidence. However, the police found the car before he could carry out his plan. Lauren's death and Bryson's arrest caused a wave of media outrage. This case was not only about the crime itself, people were shocked by how much the justice system had failed. How did it happen that a man with obvious signs of danger was released? Why did no one stop him earlier? How could the court ignore the evidence? And most importantly, could this murder have been prevented? Lauren's relatives, despite their grief, did not remain silent. They made a statement demanding reforms in the system so that such things would not happen again. They repeatedly demanded accountability for the mistakes that led to their daughter's murder. However, Bryson was not the only one condemned by society. Bryson's mother, who posted bail for him, faced particularly harsh criticism from the public. Despite the outrage, Lauren's family did not blame her directly. For them, it was more important to address the flaws in the system rather than punish a specific individual. Hundreds of people attended Lauren's funeral, friends, relatives, and residents of her hometown. She was not just a victim, she was a person who dreamed of helping others so that her goodness would not go to waste. In her memory, her family created a foundation that would help save animals, as Lauren had dreamed of doing in life. The trial of Bryson began in December 2024. He was charged with kidnapping, first-degree murder, and destruction of evidence. On Thursday, Rivers was taken by police to the county courthouse in downtown Hattiesburg, where he appeared before Judge Bob Helfrich for arraignment. So far, Bryson Rivers has pleaded not guilty to the murder of Lauren Johansen. The trial date has been set for June 25, 2025. As the trial continues, one question remains unanswered. Will he receive the punishment he truly deserves, or will there be another loophole that allows him to evade full responsibility? For Lauren's family, this fight has long transcended a single case. They now aim to ensure that no one else has to endure what they experienced. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Valerie Pride. Valerie Pride was born on March 9, 1958, and grew up in Arizona with her 5 brothers and 1 sister, which contributed to her strong and determined character. She attended South Mountain High School, where she gained a reputation for her intelligence and ambition. After graduating, she aimed to continue her education at Arizona State University, driven to create a better future for herself. During her high school years, Valerie fell in love with a young man named Jimmy Pride. Their romance flourished, and in 1974, they got married. Just a year later, they welcomed their first daughter, Shansha. In 1977, their family expanded again with the birth of their second daughter, Duana. Despite being a young mother, Valerie continued to pursue her ambitions. She aspired to become an electrician, a profession that was predominantly male at the time, and she did not let anything stand in her way. By the time Tijuana was born, Valerie had been accepted into a job training program sponsored by the United Electrical Workers, a rare and competitive opportunity. She made history by becoming the first black female electrician at the Palo Verde nuclear plant, all while caring for her 2 young children. Her life was a delicate balance of motherhood, work, and being a trailblazer in her industry. However, Valerie faced challenges in her personal life as well. Her marriage to Jimmy eventually ended in divorce. Even so, she remained strong, focusing on her career and her children, and trying to give them the best life possible. After the divorce, Valerie found new love with Ben Daniels, a co-worker at the nuclear power plant. Ben also had children from a previous marriage, and as their relationship deepened, they began planning for their future together. Although they appear perfect on the outside, their relationship is actually unstable. Valerie's sister, Vicky McDonald, revealed that Ben's past was negatively affecting their relationship. Vicky mentioned that Ben would often reassure Valerie that he had everything under control. Despite these issues, Valerie maintained her faith in Ben and their future, and before long, the two took a big step forward in their relationship together. In 1982, Valerie and Ben decided to purchase a new home in a quiet area of South Phoenix, Arizona. This marked a significant milestone in their lives. They selected a newly constructed Spanish-style home, imagining it as a place for a new beginning. Meanwhile, Valerie was finishing her final year of training to become an electrician, nearing a career breakthrough. After her divorce, she had found love again, and now they had a new home to create memories with their daughters. Everything seemed to be going very well. Sometimes, life's most promising moments can disappear in an instant. Just weeks after moving into their new home, tragedy struck unexpectedly. Labor Day weekend in 1982 began like any other for Valerie and her daughters. It was meant to be a time for relaxation, family bonding, and simple pleasures. But on Monday, September 6th, what started as a normal day turned horrific. At around 4 p.m., Ben received a call that no parent ever wants to hear. His 9-year-old daughter from a previous relationship had had an epileptic seizure while bathing. Her mother was with her but had stepped out for a minute. In that short time, the little girl suffered a seizure and submerged underwater. She was rushed to the hospital, where doctors battled to save her, but by the time Ben arrived, it was too late. His daughter had been pronounced dead. While Ben was at the hospital dealing with an unimaginable loss, Valerie and her daughters were at home, completely unaware of the situation. In a time before cell phones, Valerie had no quick way to contact Ben or find out what was happening, so she had to wait for him to call her. Around 9:30 that evening, Valerie spoke on the phone with Ben's brother. This call became her last known contact with anyone outside her home. They spoke for about 10 minutes, focusing on the condition of Ben's daughter in the hospital. During the conversation, there was a knock on the front door of Valerie's house. She informed Ben's brother that she needed to hang up to answer the door, as Ben was not home. That was the last time anyone heard from her. Neither she nor Ben's brother realized that this would be their final conversation. At around 10 p.m., after several hours in the hospital, Ben returned home, exhausted and grieving the loss of his daughter. He just wanted to get some rest. However, as he neared his house, he noticed something was wrong. The front door was slightly ajar, which was unusual, especially in the Arizona summer when everyone kept their doors closed to maintain cool air indoors. Ben carefully pushed the door open and stepped inside, where he saw a horrifying sight: blood everywhere. Valerie and her 2 daughters, Shansha and Tijuana, had been murdered. They had been brutally attacked in the living room, just a few feet apart. 8-year-old Shantia and 4-year-old Tijuana lay lifeless in the living room, their small bodies covered in blood. Valerie was also found dead near the kitchen, her body soaked in blood. The home they had just moved into, where they hoped to start anew, had turned into a scene of unimaginable violence. Ben's screams echoed through the night. Overwhelmed with grief, he collapsed, crying out so loudly that neighbors rushed outside to see what was happening. Unable to help, the neighbors called the police, as Ben was too devastated to do anything but mourn. For any parent, losing a child is an indescribable pain, but returning home to find one's entire family slaughtered is simply beyond comprehension. When the police arrived, even the most experienced officers struggled to comprehend the scene before them. Many described it as the most horrific crime scene they had ever encountered. Blood was everywhere, covering the floors and walls. Shansha and Duana were discovered huddled together in the living room near a love seat, still in their pajamas, which suggested that they were preparing for bed when the attack occurred. Valerie was found in the dining area close to the kitchen, her body just a few feet from the back door, as if she had been trying to escape. There were no signs of forced entry at the crime scene, indicating that the killer either had permission to enter or managed to get in without breaking anything. The police began to consider a disturbing possibility when they learned about a knock at the door during Valerie's last phone call. The person who knocked might have been the one responsible for the horrific crime. Furthermore, it was revealed that the suspect had not stayed in the house after the murders. They exited through the back door and jumped over the fence, vanishing into the night. The murders were initially believed to be the result of a robbery gone wrong, but that theory was quickly dismissed. There were no signs of forced entry, no stolen items, and no evidence of an intruder. Instead, they discovered a scene of shocking violence. Someone had entered the home with the singular purpose of committing murder. The pressing question for investigators was, who would want to kill a young mother and her children in such a brutal manner? Time was critical, as a dangerous killer was still on the loose, and they needed to apprehend him before he could strike again. That night, the neighborhood was quiet, but one person had noticed something unusual. As police officers searched the area, a neighbor mentioned hearing a loud argument coming from Valerie's home around 9:45 p.m., but thought it was just a typical family disagreement. When they looked outside, they saw nothing, no suspicious individuals, no signs of trouble, and nothing that seemed alarming. An hour later, at 11 p.m., Valerie's ex-husband, Jimmy Pride, arrived at the house. When the officers informed him that his daughters had been murdered, he collapsed on the pavement, screaming in anguish, just like Ben had. He couldn't contain his emotions, writhing in pain and sobbing. The anguish was so intense that the police had to intervene by force to calm him down. Meanwhile, behind the house, there was a bloody handprint on the wooden fence. This was clear evidence that the murderer had escaped by climbing over the fence and disappearing into the darkness, likely through the yard of a nearby abandoned home. But whose handprint was it, and what kind of person could commit such a brutal act? The investigation took a more disturbing turn when detectives learned that Valerie's family had only recently moved into the neighborhood. They had been there for just a few weeks, barely enough time to make friends, let alone enemies. No one truly knew them, yet someone wanted them dead. Detectives searched for answers by examining Valerie's life. They investigated her social relationships, her family, and sought any signs of a possible enemy. However, as they delved deeper, the truth became increasingly troubling. There was nothing to uncover. Valerie had no history of conflict, no long-standing grudges, and no background suggesting that she would meet a violent end. She was a devoted mother and lived an ordinary life. Yet, someone had violently disrupted that life in a horrific manner. Autopsies revealed that both Valerie and her two daughters, Shansha and Duana, had been attacked multiple times. Notably, there was no evidence of abuse, which eliminated one possible motive, but it did not bring them any closer to solving the case. With each passing day, the investigation stalled, unanswered questions continued to accumulate, and the town was left in a state of fear. On September 10, 1982, Valerie and her daughters were buried, but their funerals were filled with tension. The community was haunted by the reality that a killer remained at large. Detectives then discovered an unusual clue. A month before the murders, Valerie and Ben's home had been broken into. Initially, it appeared to be a simple burglary, but the details were alarming. The intruder rummaged through the house and also slashed their water bed. Disturbingly, they took Valerie's clothes and tossed them into the water, indicating a personal motive. It was clear that this was not a simple thief looking for valuables, but rather an enemy who wanted to send a message. Could this have been a threat? Did Valerie unknowingly encounter someone dangerous? Investigators were eager to find connections, but the case hit another dead end. The culprit had disappeared without a trace. As months went by, what seemed like promising leads faded away. Numerous tips came in, each one offering the possibility of a breakthrough, but none brought the detectives any closer to solving the case. What once felt urgent was now growing cold. As the situation became tense, rumors began to spread throughout the town, accompanied by various theories, such as ghosts in the night. One particularly chilling theory suggested that the recent murders were linked to the tragic death of Ben's daughter. Some residents speculated that Valerie and her daughters were murdered as a twisted form of revenge. Ben's 9-year-old daughter had died in an accident, leading some to believe that someone held Valerie responsible for it. However, investigators later clarified that the girl had suffered an epileptic seizure and had drowned, with the autopsy confirming that there was no foul play involved. Despite this, rumors continued to thrive, contributing to the growing anxiety in the town. As the 1-year anniversary of the murders approaches, detectives have not yet found any new leads. The murders of Valerie and her daughters shocked the community, and investigators are still searching for information, but to no avail. Valerie's union and the Silent Witness program have offered a $2,000 reward, yet no significant evidence has been uncovered so far. In August 1983, the case took an unexpected turn. Police announced that a suspect had been arrested, and the news quickly spread throughout the town, raising hopes that justice would be served. What surprised everyone, however, was that the suspect was only 14 years old and still a high school student. Authorities also disclosed that they were searching for 2 other suspects, one juvenile and one adult, believed to be involved in the murders. The police suspected that the murder might have been an act of revenge for the death of Ben's daughter, a theory that had been discussed but never confirmed. The arrested teenager was believed to be related to Ben's daughter. Could Valerie have been blamed for the child's death? Was there a deep-seated resentment that led to something violent? This idea was frightening, but it raised more questions than it answered. If Ben's daughter's death was considered an accident, why would anyone blame Valerie for it? And if the motive was revenge, why target her daughters as well? It was confusing, and even the investigators were skeptical. Just when it seemed that a motive had been identified, the case became more complicated. Within 24 hours of the arrest, the 14-year-old was released. The district attorney decided not to file charges, stating that more investigation was necessary. The evidence the detectives had was not strong enough to support a case in court. 2 other potential suspects were never arrested, no charges, no answers. The case, which had briefly reignited interest, went cold again. 2 years later, a neighbor found a surprising clue, a knife buried in a backyard. It closely resembled the one thought to have been used in the murders. Investigators quickly sent it to the crime lab, hoping it might finally provide a breakthrough. But once again, optimism turned into disappointment. The knife was tested for DNA, but there were no matches, no evidence linking it to Valerie, Shansha, or Duana. It was yet another dead end in a case that continued to be a mystery. As the years passed, the detectives never gave up on the case. They meticulously reviewed every piece of evidence, interviewed over 1,000 people, and followed every lead, but they still couldn't identify the killer or their motive. By 2012, investigators admitted that they had exhausted all possibilities and needed the public's help, believing that someone had vital information. They were convinced that this was a deeply personal crime. The perpetrator had entered Valerie's family home with the sole intention of committing murder. Now, more than 40 years later, the case remains unsolved. The brutal murders of Valerie, Shansha, and Duana continue to haunt the community, leaving an emotional scar that won't heal. Investigators think that someone close to Valerie might hold the key to the truth. But how could someone capable of such brutality carry on as if nothing had happened? Do they feel remorse? Do they ever worry about being caught? Or have they convinced themselves that they got away with murder? In recent years, advancements in forensic technology have allowed detectives to revisit the evidence. DNA collected from the crime scene has been submitted to a national database, raising hopes for a breakthrough. However, even if the killer is eventually identified, no explanation will ever make sense. Nothing can justify the horrific act of killing an innocent mother and her 2 young daughters. This crime epitomizes senseless violence. Valerie, Shansha, and Duana did not deserve what happened to them. Regardless of how much time has passed, one thing is clear: those capable of such a terrible act must be held accountable. Valerie Pride's life was a testament to resilience, ambition, and a profound love for her two daughters, Shansha and Duana. She was determined to pursue a stellar career as the first black electrician at the Palo Verde nuclear power plant and to build a new life with Ben Daniels in South Phoenix. However, on Labor Day weekend in 1982, her family's dreams and future were brutally snatched away in a horrific act of violence. More than 40 years later, the mystery of who killed them and why remains unsolved, leaving a lasting pain in the community. Despite advances in forensic science, nothing can erase the tragedy that claimed the lives of an innocent mother and her two young daughters. Crystal McDowell was born on October 26, 1979, in Baytown, Texas. Her childhood was challenging, as her parents, Pamela Sue Surratt and Anthony Paul Tony Walters, struggled with addiction, leading to an unstable home life. Tragically, she lost both parents to apparent overdoses by the age of 11. After their deaths, she was raised by her grandmother and later by her uncle, Jeff Walters. Despite these hardships, she was known for her vibrant smile, striking blue eyes, and uplifting personality. Crystal pursued a career as a flight attendant, where her adventurous spirit thrived as she traveled across the country. During her journey, she met Stephen Wayne McDowell, who was 7 years older than she. Described as gentle and soft-spoken despite his large stature, Stephen won Crystal's heart. They married in April 2007 after dating for a while. He had a daughter from a previous marriage and worked as a shipping manager, but he struggled to maintain stable employment, which forced Crystal to become the primary breadwinner. While she excelled in her career, Stephen's professional instability created tension in their relationship, especially concerning her frequent travels. As jealousy grew, Stephen began to suspect Crystal of having affairs during her flights, despite the lack of evidence of infidelity. Friends noted that Crystal valued her family and sought stability, given her difficult past. In 2016, after 15 successful years as a flight attendant, she decided to leave and join her family's real estate business. This shift allowed her to spend more time with her children and provided a sense of stability. Her uncle Jeff was proud to welcome her into the third generation of their real estate legacy. Crystal quickly excelled in her new role, being recognized for her charm, professionalism, and dedication. However, she confided in close friends that this career change also served a strategic purpose, as she believed it would help her secure custody of her children if she and Stephen divorced. By February 2017, Crystal's marriage had deteriorated significantly, prompting her to file for divorce due to years of emotional distress. On March 20th, she called 911, claiming Stephen had threatened her and their children. The authorities responded but treated the case as a precaution rather than a criminal incident. At that time, there were no custody arrangements, allowing Stephen to legally be with his children. Although officers attempted to contact him, they were unsuccessful. A few days later, Stephen returned the children, and Crystal chose not to press charges, opting instead to focus on reducing tension for the sake of their kids. Crystal's friends commented that she tried her best to keep the divorce amicable, putting the happiness of her children first. Stephen's adult daughter was troubled by this incident and questioned her father about his behavior. He expressed anger over alleged affairs that Crystal had during their marriage, accusations that those close to her dismissed as false. Many who knew them recognized that their relationship had been toxic for years, and even Stephen's daughter acknowledged that, while she and Crystal had a great relationship, the marriage had always been unstable. Although their divorce was finalized in June 2017 and appeared to be friendly, especially since Crystal helped Stephen find and purchase a new home while renovating her own, issues beneath the surface remained unresolved. Crystal often asked her family not to mention their plans or outings to Stephen, fearing his unpredictable reactions. Even simple activities, like spending time with a friend, could set him off. Despite being legally divorced, Stephen seemed unable or unwilling to accept the situation. His social media activity displayed a concerning trend, Shortly after the divorce, he changed his profile picture to a tombstone, then to an image of Santa Muerte, and later reverted to a photo of himself with Crystal. His post suggested an image of a happy family. Meanwhile, Crystal continued to emotionally support Stephen, checking in on him regularly. He claimed to be adjusting to the separation and focusing on his life, but his behavior suggested otherwise. One of Crystal's aunts noticed that Stephen frequently posted pictures of himself bringing Crystal coffee in bed, as if their relationship was still going strong. In an effort to maintain a harmonious co-parenting relationship, Crystal planned a trip with Stephen and the kids, but their intimacy only blurred the lines further. Then, in August 2017, things shifted. Crystal, now 37, met Paul Hargrave, a local jeweler and fellow single parent. Paul was charming, ambitious, and shared Crystal's passion for travel and adventure. Their relationship developed quickly, and for the first time in a long time, Crystal felt truly happy. Although she wanted to tell her family about Paul, she asked them to keep it a secret until she found the right time to inform Stephen, still fearful of his reaction. However, that fear didn't stop her from publicly sharing her happiness. On August 23rd, she posted on social media that she had never felt so joyful and that her heart was filled with a happiness she never thought possible. Just 2 days later, on August 25th, Hurricane Harvey approached. Crystal woke up at Paul's house, preparing to face the storm and fulfill her responsibilities for the day. At 7:01 a.m., she texted Stephen to ask if he had collected clean water for the kids and informed him that she was heading to his house to take shelter with them. She intended to visit a property afterward for a showing. Paul's security cameras recorded the last known images of Crystal that morning, first in the kitchen, then walking outside in heels, holding her phone, as she got into her black Mercedes-Benz. She was never seen again. Later that day, Crystal's Uncle Jeff became worried. They were close, working together in real estate and communicating frequently. He tried calling her several times to let her know that a scheduled showing had been canceled because of the storm. When she didn't answer, Jeff contacted Stephen, who sent a suspicious text, allegedly from Crystal's phone, at 9:30 a.m., stating that she planned to pick up the kids and go to Dallas. Jeff was immediately suspicious. Crystal never changed her plans without informing him, and her phone was essential for her work. Things didn't add up, and fearing something was wrong, he reported her missing to the police before noon on August 26th. As floodwaters from Hurricane Harvey swept through Houston, Jeff and 2 family members confronted Stephen. Stephen claimed Crystal hadn't been to his house in over a week, but his daughter told Jeff that she had hugged her mother the day before. That same day, a sheriff's deputy conducted a welfare check at Stephen's home. Inside, authorities discovered Crystal's black dress in the washing machine, along with her purse and handbag, clear evidence that she had recently been there. For her uncle Jeff, who had helped raise her, it was evident that Stephen was involved in her disappearance. Unfortunately, at the time, Hurricane Harvey had devastated the area, and many law enforcement officers and first responders were focused on rescue efforts in flooded neighborhoods. Consequently, the investigation stalled almost immediately. Desperate for answers, Jeff decided to reach out to the media to raise awareness and search for clues. However, his efforts were overshadowed by the constant news coverage of the storm. After days of no progress, Jeff hired a private investigator, feeling frustrated with the silence of local authorities. This decision sparked backlash. The local police chief and district attorney opposed the involvement of an outside investigator in Crystal's case, arguing that crucial evidence could be compromised. This resulted in increased tensions between Crystal's family, law enforcement, and the local media in Houston. Unwilling to give up, Jeff teamed up with Crystal's new boyfriend, Paul, to offer a $15,000 reward for credible information. They launched a social media campaign that ultimately attracted public attention. However, the investigators began to suspect not only Stephen but also Jeff and Paul. Although Jeff was tirelessly searching for Crystal, law enforcement remained skeptical of him. Rumors about his personal life, including his same-sex relationships, spread throughout the town of Baytown, leading some to believe that these biases influenced how authorities perceived his involvement. The local police commander dismissed Jeff's concerns during a national broadcast, labeling him as overly emotional and a hindrance to the investigation. Paul was also scrutinized. After taking a polygraph test with inconclusive results, his credibility came into question. Things worsened when he sent surveillance footage from his home to news outlets instead of directly giving it to the police. Paul defended his actions by stating that he initially tried to share the videos with the sheriff's office but felt ignored, prompting him to go public to clear his name. Then there was Stephen. Even though he displayed manipulative behavior, threatening self-harm if Crystal left him, investigators perceived him as polite, helpful, and cooperative. However, family and friends described the marriage as deeply unhealthy and controlling. Authorities did not see Stephen as a potential threat or a vengeful ex-husband. This perspective began to shift on Tuesday, August 29th, as floodwaters receded. A family friend discovered Crystal's black Mercedes-Benz parked outside a dilapidated motel, an area highlighted during their online campaign. The doors were unlocked, and the keys were still in the ignition. Investigators suspect the car was staged as a burglary, but flooding has made it difficult to access. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses showed Crystal's car entering the motel lot at 6:37 a.m. on August 26, the day she disappeared. Just 5 hours later, Stephen was seen on camera at a nearby gas station. He did not purchase gas. Instead, he drove toward the motel, seemingly checking to see if the car was still there. Even more unsettling, other footage captured a hooded figure resembling Stephen riding a bicycle through the rain near the motel that same morning. The evidence was accumulating, and for the first time, attention turned to Stephen, not as a grieving ex-husband but as a potential suspect in a case that had gone too long without resolution. The investigation took a significant turn when surveillance footage from a Walmart, situated just across the highway from the motel where Crystal's car was discovered, showed a man who looked like Stephen buying a bicycle early on the morning of August 26, 2017. He paid with cash, and the timing matched the sighting of a hooded figure on a bike near the scene. Despite this troubling evidence, he denied being involved in Crystal's disappearance. As authorities indicated they lacked direct evidence, they allowed him to go home with his children. Crystal's family was outraged. Her uncle, Jeff, pointed out to the district attorney that Crystal had previously reported that Stephen had threatened to harm their children if she left him. Jeff was convinced of Stephen's emotional and mental instability. It wasn't until September 8, nearly 2 weeks after Crystal vanished, that the district attorney intervened. The children were placed in protective custody, and Stephen was brought in for questioning. However, Stephen controlled the situation. He requested to return home for one last night to organize things and promised to confess the next day. Jeff and other family members were angry, fearing that this unsupervised time might allow Stephen to harm himself and evade justice. On September 9, 2017, Stephen returned to the police station and confessed. He told investigators that during a heated argument, Crystal had told him she would be taking her new boyfriend, Paul, on a family trip instead of him. Due to this, he became enraged. While their children slept upstairs, he attacked Crystal from behind and strangled her to death. Afterward, Stephen wrapped her body in a blanket, placed it in the trunk of his car, and drove before sunrise to a wooded area near his home, where he disposed of her remains. Even after confessing, he still refused to reveal the location of the body unless the prosecutors agreed not to pursue the death penalty. Due to the damage caused by Hurricane Harvey and the time that had passed, authorities worried that they wouldn't find the body without his assistance, so they accepted his terms. Later that day, Stephen guided authorities to a remote, overgrown area, and Crystal's remains were discovered in an advanced state of decomposition. Stephen McDowell, who was 44 at the time, was charged with first-degree murder, and bail was set at $500,000, which he could not afford. In addition to the issues of jealousy and anger, the case also highlights a more terrifying truth. Without Crystal, Stephen would have no financial resources to support himself and his children. The pursuit of justice moved slowly, as the trial did not commence until June 2019. During this time, Stephen displayed no remorse in court. He tried to create the impression that he was a man suffering from pain, claiming he acted out of a sudden fit of passion, a defense strategy in Texas that could significantly lessen his punishment if accepted. He also suggested that Crystal's death was the result of a consensual encounter that went awry. However, the prosecution effectively countered this narrative, highlighting the ongoing emotional abuse and control he had imposed during their relationship. Stephen's defense team attempted to tarnish Crystal's reputation by presenting unverified text messages and claims that she had been unfaithful. However, her friends and family stood up for her, describing her as a vibrant and loving person dedicated to her children. They also shared experiences of the years of dysfunction and manipulation she endured. One of the most heart-wrenching moments during the trial occurred when Mandy Avalos, Crystal's lifelong friend and guardian of her children, took the stand. She recounted a painful revelation in December 2017 when Stephen and Crystal's 5-year-old daughter shared a secret. The girl recalled the morning her mother went missing. She had heard her parents arguing. After hearing the commotion, she walked from the bathroom into the bedroom, where she witnessed her father pushing her mother onto the bed and covering her mouth and nose with his hand. She stood at the edge of the bed and watched until her mother stopped moving. Afterwards, her father took her upstairs and told her not to speak about what she had seen. Mandy quickly reported the incident to the authorities, and she was placed in a trauma counseling program, but the emotional scars continued to haunt her. Another important witness for the prosecution was Melissa Cherry, Crystal's cousin and close friend. Melissa testified about helping Crystal move out of her home when her conflicts with Stephen escalated. Melissa later supported her move back home after Stephen threatened to harm himself if she did not return. Cherry recounted that even after the divorce, he continued to emotionally manipulate Crystal, including starving himself to make her feel responsible for his health. The day after Crystal went missing, Melissa and Jeff visited Stephen's house, where they found him looking anxious, shaking, and in tears. The daughter of Crystal and Stephen claimed that she had seen her mother the day before and pointed to a black dress in the closet in a concerning manner, saying that evil spirits had taken her away. This disturbing scene prompted Melissa and Jeff to call the police from outside the house, urgently requesting that they remove Stephen from the children's lives, but their requests were ignored. Melissa also shared her account of a family cruise that Stephen had suggested as a way to say goodbye peacefully. Although Crystal hesitantly agreed, she made it clear that there would be no threats, manipulation, or harm involved. However, as the trip approached, an argument over finances led her to cancel, realizing that Stephen was not genuinely trying to say goodbye but was instead attempting to win her back. The most troubling testimony came from an inmate who had shared a cell with Stephen and claimed that Stephen confessed in detail to killing Crystal. According to the inmate, the motive was a text message from another man. He described how Stephen admitted to using zip ties to bind Crystal's hands after her death, information only known to the forensic team. Officials from the Texas Department of Public Safety corroborated parts of Stephen's confession, stating that he claimed Crystal had arrived early on the morning of August 25, 2017. They had an argument, during which she told him that she had never really loved him. She encouraged him to move on with his life. In a fit of rage, he strangled her in the bedroom. The 5-day trial concluded quickly. The jury found Stephen McDowell guilty of first-degree murder in just 3.5 hours. On September 10, 2019, he received a sentence of 50 years in prison, with a requirement to serve at least 25 years before being eligible for parole, potentially allowing for his release in 2042. Crystal's family was heartbroken by what they perceived as a light sentence. Her uncle Jeff exclaimed in court that Stephen deserved a harsher punishment, while others expressed frustration, advocating for a life sentence or the death penalty. However, those options were not available due to the agreement Stephen made in exchange for revealing the location of Crystal's body. The family's main concern was not the length of the prison sentence but rather the emotional impact on the children. Despite being surrounded by love, they faced a devastating loss. Crystal had dedicated her life to them, and now they were left to cope with trauma that many adults would struggle to endure. By 2020, Mandy, who had taken in the children immediately after Crystal's murder, was working to adopt them legally. Some sources indicate that Mandy was Crystal's best friend from childhood, while others suggest they may have had a romantic relationship at one time. Regardless of their history, Mandy was Crystal's most trusted confidant and was committed to caring for the children. Now that you know the complete story, we would love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe Stephen McDowell received the justice he deserved? Please share your opinion in the comments. We are reading all of them. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Sherry Beasley. On Saturday morning, June 29, 1991, 6-year-old Sherry Beasley woke up before the rest of her family. She put on a pink suit and a sweater and carefully left the bedroom she shared with her younger sister. The girl made breakfast for herself and her sister. Later, she asked her mother if she could go to the nearest store because she really wanted to buy some candy that was located nearby. Her young mother, Carrie Greenhill, had been feeling ill that day and sometimes allowed her daughter to leave the house to make small purchases. This time, Carrie even gave Sherry a list of groceries that needed to be purchased. At 1 p.m., Sherry got on her pink bike and set off on a journey that should have taken no more than half an hour. Another woman and her son went shopping at 1:20 p.m. as well. As they passed the store where Sherry was supposed to go, the woman noticed an abandoned pink bicycle. She recognized it right away because this was a small community where people lived in the area and everyone knew each other. Only Sherry had such a bicycle, which had been a Christmas present for the girl 6 months earlier. The neighbor had never seen Sherry's favorite gift thrown aside so carelessly. Looking around for the girl, she didn't see anyone, which seemed suspicious, but at first, she decided not to panic. Maybe the girl was somewhere nearby. As the woman was returning from the store, she noticed the bicycle without its owner again. This seemed more suspicious, especially since she was familiar with Sherry's mother. She stopped at Carrie's house and informed Carrie about the abandoned bicycle. Carrie became worried, so she immediately went to the indicated place, where she found the bicycle along with a bag containing cash and a grocery list. Some of the items were lying nearby, indicating that the girl had made it to the store and bought the necessary goods, but something had happened on her way back. Carrie glanced around the area but still couldn't find her daughter, so she went to the police. They took the case seriously and immediately began searching for Sherry. By the evening of the same day, news of her disappearance was dominating all the media. Many local residents came out to help and assisted in the search for her. All of this occurred in a quiet suburb of Melbourne called Rosebud, Australia, which at that time had a population of about 5,000 people. It is a place where many people know each other, and there is a very low crime rate. It is located on a peninsula, and rarely do you meet strangers. Many locals do not even lock their doors, and mothers let their children walk unsupervised. It was quiet here until Sherry went missing. Detectives talked to Sherry's mother and her partner. Carrie suspected Sherry's biological father, believing he might have kidnapped Sherry. They had long battled over custody of their daughter, and the man had taken the news of losing custody very badly. However, it was quickly confirmed that during that period, Sherry's father was fishing with friends in another region of the country, which was too far away for him to be involved in Sherry's disappearance. This theory was thus dismissed. Witnesses were found who saw Sherry meet with a little boy and talk to him. At that moment, a blue car drove by, but further developments happened without any witnesses. Shane admitted that he had met Sherry in the very location where the bicycle was found. He confirmed that suddenly, an unknown man drove up to the children, grabbed Sherry, and drove away. The man acted so quickly that Shane didn't even have time to react. Unfortunately, Shane didn't know much about car models and brands. He could only describe it as blue and lacking rear doors, likely a sedan. The police carefully examined the area where Sherry had disappeared and discovered tire tracks that confirmed Shane's story. The investigators continued their work and managed to find several witnesses who saw a similar-looking car with a driver described as a man between 30 and 40 years of age. Unfortunately, that description was also quite vague. Notably, a child was sitting in the passenger seat, and the girl appeared to be crying. Although they were unable to obtain a detailed description of the man, the police now knew the exact make of the kidnapper's car, a blue Toyota Corolla. It was a fairly popular model at that time, and in the area, there were about 700 similar cars registered, so the scale of the work only increased. A witness named Margaret Hobbs approached the site. She is a former law enforcement officer who has spent recent decades conducting rehabilitation therapy for assault-prone criminals in a private setting. Margaret, unsure of where her efforts to help society would lead her, worked as a probation officer for many years. After her dismissal, she became a psychotherapist and organized her own private practice, specializing in therapy with men who had committed abuse crimes. Margaret encountered criminals daily, usually those convicted of minor offenses. In November of 1984, 47-year-old Robert Arthur Selby Lowe was sent to see a specialist for the first time, charged with exposing himself to schoolgirls in a shopping mall and making inappropriate comments. He had a previous conviction for theft. From the start, Margaret noticed that the man was very different from the type of people she usually worked with. He was very polite, looked decent, neat, wore glasses, and had a British accent. For many years, he had worked as a church elder, was a Sunday school teacher, and a sports coach for children. No matter how decent he looked, Margaret figured him out. Despite his respectable appearance, something about him was alarming. After the trial, he received a year of correctional labor for exhibitionism, and then he began to regularly visit Margaret for therapy sessions. Gradually, she uncovered more and more criminal episodes from his past, starting from the time he lived in his homeland, Great Britain. Then, in search of a better life, he moved to New Zealand and later went to Australia. In 1967, he said that he regularly demonstrated himself and derived pleasure from it, especially if the victims were minors. Margaret noticed that he took pride in his dubious past. Margaret even managed to gain his trust. By April 1990, he came to her office and admitted to an accusation of attempted kidnapping of a minor. Robert again insisted that he had done nothing wrong. However, he mentioned that an alarming incident had indeed occurred in the suburbs where he worked at that time. Margaret was already good at getting the truth out of him, and gradually she managed to find out what had happened. He met with schoolgirls with whom he had a stagnant conversation about his dream pony. From their dialogue, it became clear that he could very well have had malicious intent. The next time Robert came, about a month later, he said that he had tried to talk to a 12-year-old girl, but a policeman intervened in their conversation. Now he had a new charge. 2 girls, aged 8 and 10, were standing on the railway platform when Robert approached them and started an indecent conversation, attempting to persuade them toward intimacy. All this was overheard by a patrolman standing nearby, whom Robert did not notice. When the policeman approached, Robert tried to escape and had to be detained, thrown to the ground. Before he turned to Margaret, he asked her for help. Margaret refused to write him a characterization that could be used for defense in court because she was sure of his guilt. However, he threatened to involve the girls so that they would testify against him in court, which could become another trauma for them. It became obvious that Robert felt no remorse for what had happened. He was only trying to save himself, and his crimes were only becoming more dangerous. Margaret asked him not to come to therapy anymore. Previously, she believed she was helping him. However, she now realized that it was only getting worse. He was deriving perverted pleasure from their time together. Robert was angry about this and refused to quit therapy, but Margaret insisted he leave. As a result, he flared up and slammed the door. Later, Margaret agreed to write a characterization, but stated the truth within it. Robert's lawyer decided not to use this document in court, believing it would only harm his client. By November 1990, Robert was found guilty of stalking children, but the punishment turned out to be ridiculous. It was limited to a fine of $100. Knowing this, Margaret was alarmed. She now understood that he could get away with it. Fortunately for her, Robert did not visit Margaret for some time, as she had asked. Margaret was once again driving to her office when the first kidnapping in the Rosebud occurred. A search operation was underway, and by this time, authorities knew that the probable kidnapper was a man about 50 years old who could drive a blue Toyota Corolla. As soon as Margaret heard about it, she immediately thought of Robert Lowe. However, Margaret knew that his wife owned the house in the area where Sherry had gone missing. Of course, this was not enough ground to accuse him of anything, so Margaret dismissed the suspicion and continued her usual life. However, the thought that her former client could be involved in all this did not leave her mind. Margaret continued to monitor the search, which was not progressing, but locals were worried that Sherry had become a victim of an unknown serial killer, whom the media had dubbed Mr. Cruel. As it turned out, this man was credited with numerous crimes in the suburbs of Melbourne in the late 80s and early 90s. He was considered the main suspect in the kidnapping of 13-year-old Carmine Chain, who was abducted from her home about 3 months before Sherry Beasley's disappearance. Her body, with gunshot wounds, was found a year later in Edgar's Creek. Despite a long break, Robert Lowe came to Margaret again. Margaret's son-in-law had organized a law firm on the floor below her office, but he was not there, so Robert decided to talk to her. This time, the conversation was again about the crime of which he was accused. Naturally, according to him, the Supreme Court's decision was unfounded. Margaret immediately noticed that Robert had changed a lot. He looked unkempt and was rude to her. This atypical behavior only increased her suspicions about him. She refused to engage further and then went downstairs to see what kind of car Robert had arrived in. It turned out that he had used a blue Toyota Corolla without rear doors, just as described in the suspect's profile for the kidnapping. Margaret realized that he could indeed be involved in the disappearance of Sherry and contacted the police. It turned out that the police had recently reached his name on the list of cars and were checking him out. Robert matched the description of Sherry's kidnapper quite well in terms of age, appearance, and the make of the car. It was also discovered that Robert had a criminal past concerning harassment of minors, which looked especially suspicious. Then detectives had a conversation with him. Robert appeared too nervous, reluctantly answered questions, but quickly remembered what he did on the day of Sherry's kidnapping. His answers seemed dubious. Now, Margaret was sure of his involvement. The police arrived at Robert's house and took his car away for forensic examination. Robert himself was arrested and taken in for questioning. He was allowed to make one phone call and immediately reached out to Margaret, asking her to recommend the best lawyer she knew. Margaret advised him to stay with the lawyer who had already handled his previous cases. Then, Robert was released due to insufficient evidence. A month later, he came to work looking disheveled and sloppy as usual. According to him, detectives had interrogated him for more than 4 hours, but he refused to provide fingerprints and DNA samples. Without irrefutable evidence against him, the detectives could not proceed without his voluntary permission. However, suspicions against Robert were not unfounded. At the time of Sherry's disappearance, he provided an alibi that no one could confirm. During his communication with the detectives, Robert changed his story several times, which further strengthened the suspicion against him. When they tried to check the alibi, the time periods Robert indicated did not match the statements of witnesses, including his friend, employer, and wife. Even Robert's wife began to notice oddities in his behavior that day. Robert claimed he was not in that area, but several people saw him there. He returned home only in the evening, quickly changed his clothes, and threw his things in the washing machine, which he had never done before. He thoroughly washed his car. Curiously, he now lived in a country house not far from the place of Sherry's abduction. From the first meeting with Margaret, he insisted that he was innocent of Sherry's kidnapping and was sure that the police wouldn't find any evidence against him, allowing him to start a new life. 3 months after Sherry's disappearance, on September 24, 1991, 2 girls were riding horses along a country road about 10 kilometers from Rosebud. They smelled something unpleasant and went to investigate. Inside, the girls saw decomposed remains, but initially mistook them for a kangaroo. The next day, when they passed by again, they realized that scavenger animals had pulled the bones into the open. They then understood that what they saw was not an animal, but rather the remains of a small person who was wearing a pink tracksuit, matching the items of clothing that Sherry Beasley had been described as wearing. The girls went to the police and reported their frightening find. Forensic examination identified the remains as belonging to the missing 6-year-old girl, Sherry. During this period, Robert Lowe became a regular customer of Margaret. When she heard that the child's body had been found, she spoke to him about it. He clearly became nervous and inappropriately added that he had no idea where the body could have been found, even though Margaret did not ask him about it. She noticed that her client's behavior became increasingly erratic with each meeting, he more nervous each time. During this period, Margaret became convinced that Robert was responsible for the crime. It felt like a game of cat and mouse. Margaret knew that Robert would deny his guilt to the last. However, he liked to talk about what happened, and gradually, he revealed more and more details that he could not have known. Robert's house was searched. He was brought in for questioning several times, during which the suspect insisted that he was not guilty and had an alibi. Robert was under surveillance. It was found that he often visited public places where he watched girls and satisfied himself. Newspaper clippings and articles related to the kidnappings of Carmine Chain and other girls were found in his house. He did not just collect them but also made strange notes. All of this resembled some kind of madness, which was even confirmed by his wife. According to her, he talked about it so often while they were still living together that she was forced to ask him to stop. Now, she was determined to get a divorce. Finally, two detectives visited Margaret Hobbs and reported that they were investigating Robert's case, his probable involvement in the murder of Sherry Beasley. At that time, they still had no evidence. Additionally, Margaret did not want to violate medical ethics and disclose details of her therapy sessions with Robert. However, she began to doubt, realizing that he bore a striking resemblance to the real criminal. The detectives decided to act discreetly and secretly from Margaret. They installed a small microphone above the office, allowing them to listen to all of Robert Lowe's visits. Investigators were in the next building, eavesdropping on his revelations. One time Robert came in for therapy, he mentioned that he might know where the body was found, as one day he and his wife were walking there. Then, Margaret asked him to point to the location on a map. A stroke marked the location. Margaret checked and found that this mark precisely coincided with where the body of Sherry had been discovered. It seemed that this could not have been a mere coincidence. During the next visit, Robert entered the office and suddenly began to talk about how the child's body might have been eaten by insect larvae. This struck Margaret as inappropriate and alarming. She saw a small foreign object. Margaret quickly realized it was a larva. In anger, Margaret demanded he leave the office. Robert complied, leaving behind the plastic bag with which he had come. When Margaret looked inside, she found it was filled with larvae. By March 1992, Robert came to see Margaret again. At their meeting, he stated that he was inclined to block memories of the terrible deeds he had committed, to the extent that he truly could not remember anything. Margaret asked if this could be connected with the death of Sherry Beasley. He admitted that it indeed could be the case. However, he was more worried about the divorce, which he was struggling with. Robert continued to talk but did not say anything specific until April 1, 1992, when he finally told Margaret that he wanted to tell the truth. She agreed to help, after which he began his story. Robert said, on June 29, 1991, he was driving along the road when he noticed two children arguing on the street. It was Sherry and her friend, Shane. He stopped and offered Sherry a ride to avoid the conflict. She agreed, sat in the passenger seat, and buckled up. As he drove away, Sherry suddenly began to choke. She looked scared and panicked. By the time Robert stopped, the girl had stopped breathing. He checked her pulse and realized that she had died. His first thought was to dig a grave to dispose of the body. However, he didn't have a shovel. Robert wanted to take Margaret to where he left Sherry's body. Margaret was horrified but determined to obtain a complete confession, so she agreed but requested a couple of hours to prepare and settle some business. When Robert Lowe made his confession, the police were informed. Margaret was deeply concerned about the implications for professional ethics, but she understood that she was doing the right thing. A trip with the main suspect was scheduled for the same day, and the police offered to assist in catching a dangerous killer. They were going to accompany Margaret along with the criminal, but secretly, in order to get a confession without scaring him off. Margaret was given a special device with a panic button that she was supposed to press if she suddenly felt in danger. In addition, a hidden listening device was installed in the car. On the evening of the same day, Robert and Margaret headed to Rosebud. First, Robert decided to stop where a small pink bicycle had been found. He pointed out exactly where they had arrived, which was marked with a yellow ribbon tied to a tree that someone had left in memory of Sherry. Then they walked to the drain pipe where the body was found. Here, mourners had left flowers, organizing a semblance of a memorial. Robert told Margaret the story of Sherry Beasley, wiped his tears with his sleeve, prayed for his salvation, and offered Margaret to come in for a cup of tea, but she refused, left. Margaret felt unwell and stopped a couple of 100 meters away, where she threw up from the horror she experienced. After this, she expressed a desire to cooperate even more closely with the police to catch this dangerous man. Detectives collected all the necessary evidence, and by May 1993, Robert Lowe was arrested in the suburbs of Melbourne. He refused to cooperate and said that he was as pure as Jesus Christ. Therefore, detectives had to talk to his lawyer. Lowe's concept of guilt was useless because his confession had been recorded when he was brought to court. He was met by a crowd of journalists and angry members of the local community, including Sherry's mother. She wanted to pounce on him, but others held her back. It was believed that Robert was lying, claiming that Sherry had voluntarily gotten into the car. This contradicted the words of Shane's friend, who insisted that they had not quarreled and that the man had simply dragged Sherry into the car by force. Additionally, they did not believe that she had accidentally suffocated herself during a panic attack. Unfortunately, Sherry's body was found too late, making it difficult to establish the exact circumstances. Although he was in prison, new details of the crime emerged thanks to the testimony of a cellmate. However, these details needed to be checked and confirmed before the jury. His story about the killer was questioned, Robert, so the cellmate was offered to wear a wiretap to elicit more information. A legend was invented, according to which the cellmate had a good lawyer who could help Robert, but to do so, he needed to know exactly what happened. This story looked plausible, and the cellmate managed to convince him. Robert told a new, more convincing version of events, which is now considered final. He reported that he had watched Sherry for quite a long time and discovered that the little girl periodically went shopping alone. He kidnapped her, taking advantage of this, and brutally abused her. After that, he strangled her with his hands. Robert disposed of the body by throwing it down the drain and discarded the clothes because they had too many traces of his DNA on them. The trial of Robert Arthur Selby Lowe began in October 1994, with Margaret Hobbs becoming the prosecution's star witness and testifying for 4 days. His cellmate expressed gratitude to the detectives who allowed him to put a dangerous child killer behind bars. The jury deliberated for 5 hours and found Robert guilty of kidnapping and murdering Sherry Beasley. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for first-degree murder and an additional 15 years for kidnapping. Margaret's cooperation with the police was considered a controversial decision. People were divided into 2 camps. Some regarded her as virtuous for allowing a dangerous criminal to be put behind bars, while others accused her of failing to maintain the confidentiality of her client, which appeared unprofessional. In 1997, Robert appealed, arguing that Margaret should not have been a witness in the case, but this appeal was rejected. This story left an indelible mark on Margaret's soul, and she began writing a book. In 1996, she and her husband died in a car accident. The work on this book was completed by journalist and writer Andrew Rule. In 2021, Robert Arthur Selby Lowe, 84, died at Hopkins Correctional Center near Ararat in Western Victoria. The tragic fate of Sherry Beasley serves as a haunting reminder of the fragility of innocence and the hidden dangers that can lurk even in the quietest of communities. What began as a simple errand on a peaceful Saturday morning spiraled into a nightmare that shattered the lives of her family and left an indelible scar on Rosebud. Jonathan Candy was a 42-year-old engineer working with the Oklahoma City basketball team. He focused on equipment maintenance and had developed his career over many years, first in sports and then in technical fields, which allowed him to support his family comfortably. In 2024, he had been married for 10 years to his wife, Lindsay Candy, who was 39. They lived in Yukon, Oklahoma, a small, quiet suburb with a population of over 20,000. They had 4 children, Dylan, 18, Ethan, 14, Lucas, 12, and their youngest child, who was just 10. The identity of the 10-year-old was kept private due to his young age and vulnerability. In the spring of 2024, this 10-year-old boy is about to experience a tragic event, an event that will greatly impact his life and those around him. The Candy family was viewed as a model American family, friendly and tight-knit. They have built a strong influence in the community, raising their children in one of the safest and most beautiful suburbs of the state. At that time, Ethan and Lucas were in school, in the 9th and 6th grades, respectively. Meanwhile, Dylan had graduated from high school in 2023 and was preparing for adulthood. He planned to attend college and had found a job to save money while applying to various schools. The Candy family did not have any mental health issues. Their upbringing was stable and uneventful. There were no instances of running away from home, and the parents maintained a peaceful household, allowing their children the freedom to make choices. This environment contributed to a thriving atmosphere at home, where the kids grew up feeling strong, sociable, and loved. They were always supportive of each other and even appeared in a local bakery advertisement, where they were regular customers and shared their favorite meals. Jonathan and Lindsay worked hard to help their children prepare for the future and lead fulfilling lives. However, behind this seemingly happy facade, a terrible situation is unfolding that will create a nightmare on Willow Street. On the evening of April 21, 2024, a Sunday, the whole family gathered at home. The older children spent time with their friends but returned home early to prepare for school the next day and to go to bed on time. Everything seemed normal for the Candy family, and no one anticipated the shocking incident that was about to occur. After dinner, Jonathan went to bed, and each child settled into their own room on the second floor. Later that night, the children overheard Jonathan and Lindsay arguing in the living room on the first floor. Although the specifics of their argument were unclear, it escalated dangerously. Despite the tension, everyone remained calm and went to bed. The youngest boy, whose fan was running, could hardly hear the commotion below. Meanwhile, a tragedy unfolded on the first floor that resulted in the deaths of 5 family members. But what exactly happened, and who was responsible for this horrific crime? In conversations with the only surviving family member, more details emerged after the incident. The fire alarm went off, which forensic experts determined was caused by gunpowder fumes from the shooting. The noise startled the youngest child, who didn't understand what was happening or why the alarm was sounding. Curious, he left his room to investigate, completely unprepared for the horrific scene he was about to encounter. As he stepped into the hallway, he noticed that the doors to his brother's rooms were open. Ordinarily, this might have seemed odd, but he thought everyone had gotten up due to the alarm. He made his way downstairs to the first floor and noticed a light on. He called out for his parents but received no answer. He then called his brothers, but all he got was the continuous beeping of the warning. Hoping to find answers, the boy went to the living room. The first thing he saw was blood splattered on the walls and furniture. In the center of the room lay his mother and father in large pools of blood. His father was sprawled on top of his mother, having suffered a gunshot wound to the head. The boy was terrified and in shock. He rushed to his father, trying to wake him up, not fully grasping what had happened. He saw the bullet holes and felt his parents grow cold, but he refused to believe they were dead. Despite shaking his father repeatedly, there were no signs of life. His mother did not respond either. In a moment of desperation, he called out for his brothers, still unaware that he was the only survivor. Overwhelmed with grief, he cried and collapsed onto his parents' lifeless bodies. He then walked through his brother's room and saw an identical, horrifying scene. Blood was everywhere, and there were no signs of life. Eventually, he realized he needed to call for help. Summoning his courage, he reached out to a rescue worker and requested assistance. This initiated a horrifying sequence of incidents that would lead to a deeper investigation into this unimaginable tragedy. When law enforcement and paramedics arrived, they quickly realized that nothing could be done. The family had been dead for several hours, as indicated by the rigor mortis and the state of the blood on the floor. The parents and older brothers were declared dead at the scene, and the house was cordoned off for investigation. Forensic experts and detectives, horrified, began to reconstruct the scene of the brutal massacre. The idea of an outsider attacking the family was quickly dismissed, as there were no signs of forced entry or any outsiders present. This raised concerns that the murders had been committed by a family member. At some point, the 10-year-old boy was found to be covered in blood, leading police to consider whether he might have been involved. However, his behavior, condition, age, and the evidence quickly eliminated any doubt. There were no traces of gunpowder on his hands, and no fingerprints on the weapon. Forensic experts thoroughly examined the windows and doors and found no signs of staging. Everything in the house was intact, with no valuables disturbed or missing. They reviewed street surveillance footage and only saw the family members returning from the store that evening. No one else had entered or left the house before the police's arrival. The boy mentioned hearing his parents scream before he fell asleep. Since the weapon was found next to the body of Jonathan, the boy's father, it was clear that the father had committed a crime against his family before harming himself. As investigators analyzed the crime scene, it became evident how ruthless and cold-blooded 42-year-old Jonathan had been. The motive behind his actions remained unclear. The police could not determine the cause of the conflict, as no suicide notes were found in the house. They needed to analyze the mobile phones and computers of all family members, which were seized immediately, hoping to uncover new information. However, a complete analysis would take time. It remains a puzzling question why a loving father, who seems to be a good family man, would kill his wife and children but spare his youngest son. The weapon used in the crime was taken for examination, confirming that all members of Candy's family, including Jonathan, were shot with the same gun. Only Jonathan's fingerprints were found on the handle, ruling out the involvement of anyone else in the attack. Notably, none of the victims, including Lindsay, showed any signs of defensive injuries, suggesting that Jonathan's violent outburst was completely unexpected and uncontrollable, leaving no one time to react or defend themselves. Lindsay, who did not die instantly, bled on the living room floor while Jonathan, upstairs, methodically killed their sleeping children. It is believed that Lindsay heard the commotion but was powerless to intervene. Detectives considered the incident to be highly unusual. Friends and relatives found it hard to believe that a devoted father and loving husband like Jonathan could commit such an atrocity. He had no criminal record, and police had never been called to their home for domestic disturbances. Initially, investigators considered other possibilities, such as robbery or an attack by a stranger, but none of these theories added up. The family was well-liked and had no enemies, and Jonathan seemed incapable of such violence. Investigations cleared Jonathan of any doubts regarding his innocence. Officers interviewed relatives and neighbors to find potential explanations for the tragedy. Those close to the family described them as friendly and problem-free, with Jonathan being a respected community member who avoided criminal behavior. His service record was impeccable, and he was seen as calm and non-confrontational. The suddenness of the incident deeply shocked his relatives, as there had been no warning signs leading up to it. While some considered Jonathan a psychopath, they acknowledged that although disagreements between him and his wife occurred occasionally, they were rare and never involved violence. People struggled to accept his guilt, and as police statements regarding the investigation emerged, confusion set in. The community sought answers to the questions raised by the media, eagerly seeking clarity amidst the turmoil. On the day of the tragedy, Candy's family did not reach out to relatives or friends. They spent time together just once, going to the store for groceries, after which the older children left home to meet their friends. Nevertheless, they all reunited in the evening. The youngest child was unaware of any issues. It felt like a regular day. Jonathan remained calm and did not show any signs of anger. An alarming piece of information came from Michael Buru, a neighbor of the Andy family, who revealed that Jonathan had often helped him with construction and household tasks before the tragedy. They maintained a close relationship and even talked about personal matters. Michael mentioned that Jonathan once confided in him about his struggles, admitting he was dealing with depression and was taking medication prescribed by a doctor. However, Jonathan suggested that he had overcome his illness and that his depression had improved. He claimed to feel fine and had no lingering negativity toward his spouse, attributing his previous unhappiness to his mental state. After that conversation, no one heard him mention a relapse. There were no incidents indicating a return of his depressive symptoms. Investigators reviewed Jonathan's medical records but found nothing new. He had not sought help from psychiatrists or psychologists in recent times. If there had been any changes in Jonathan's condition, they would likely have been noticeable in his behavior. However, the investigation hit a dead end because no one reported anything suspicious. Some family members were aware of Jonathan's past depression, which had been resolved years ago, but they expressed no concern about his current state. Jonathan's mother mentioned that he had quickly overcome his illness and that his depression had not negatively impacted family relationships. Rather, his wife had supported him throughout. People close to Candy's family did not perceive Jonathan's struggles as serious. After overcoming his depression, he seemed to be part of a normal, happy family. The detectives found no additional leads. Was it possible that Jonathan experienced a resurgence of depression? If so, was he keeping it hidden? This was the only potential explanation for what had happened and could provide a motive. However, psychiatrists noted that it would be very difficult to hide such a condition given their active social life. Lindsay and Jonathan regularly spent time with their children, enjoying a vibrant lifestyle filled with barbecues and social gatherings. Their last barbecue event took place on Saturday, April 20th, at Michael's house, where neither Jonathan nor his wife displayed any signs of conflict. What occurred in their home did not align with the existing narrative. More information was needed, but it was lacking. There was hope that insights from mobile phones and computers could reveal important clues. There was a suspicion that jealousy might have played a role in the murder. However, even this line of investigation yielded little. The initial examination revealed no significant findings. Jonathan and his wife communicated regularly on social media, but their conversations appeared to be friendly, without any signs of intrigue or infidelity. Consequently, any theories about betrayal had to be set aside until a thorough analysis of their correspondence could be conducted. Additionally, Lindsay and Jonathan conducted routine searches online, but nothing concerning emerged. The main witness for the police in the case was a 10-year-old boy who, for unknown reasons, had been taken in by his maternal relatives. Many compassionate individuals wanted to help him deal with his trauma, leading to the creation of a fund aimed at raising $100,000 for his support. By the fall of 2024, the fund had already collected over $74,000, and donations were still pouring in. During the spring, the boy attracted attention not only from those offering emotional and financial support but also from law enforcement officers conducting investigations. The police did not speak to him immediately, recognizing that he was in shock and struggling to cope with his traumatic experience. Despite his young age, he was very aware of the horrific event that had claimed the lives of his loved ones. Initially, the boy had trouble sleeping, often waking up screaming and in tears. Multiple psychologists worked with him after he once expressed that he did not want to live. His relatives rallied around him, helping to ease the effects of his severe trauma, but he still faced many challenges ahead. Experts concluded that the boy could meet with the police to provide them with important information, so a child psychologist was brought in to ensure he felt safe and comfortable during the conversation. The psychologist collaborated with investigators to create a list of topics that would be least traumatic for the child. However, despite their efforts, what the boy shared mirrored what others familiar with his family had reported. He struggled to understand why his father had committed such a violent act. He recalled hearing his parents arguing before bedtime, but he could not comprehend the details. A fan was running in the room, drowning out the sounds of the argument, and eventually, he fell asleep, unaware of the tragedy that was unfolding. The boy also confirmed that Jonathan was never cruel or aggressive. He had never hurt his children or his wife, Lindsay. Detectives wanted to know why no one else reacted to the shooting that began inside the house. The other children must have heard their mother's screams, yet they were fast asleep and were shot during the night. It seemed as though fate was on the side of evil. Jonathan used a small-caliber pistol, which is relatively quiet, and forensic experts suggested this might explain why neighbors didn't notice anything during such a quiet time of day. However, it was puzzling that none of the children in the house woke up or heard anything until it was too late. The younger child mentioned that fans were running in every room, which might have muffled the sounds of the shots. Despite the police's efforts, they could not gather new information from the child. The detectives had to ask him some uncomfortable questions regarding the incident, the positions of the bodies, and the bloodshed. Eventually, the boy became anxious and began to cry. The child psychologist decided to halt the questioning to prevent further distress for the boy, leaving the detectives without any new leads. Relatives reported that after meeting with the police, the boy became even more anxious. Psychologists were worried about how to help him deal with this new trauma, as he had just begun to recover from his previous experiences. The police's questioning raised feelings of fear, despair, and helplessness once again. Consequently, they decided not to push him further and to avoid drawing media attention to him. Journalists, being less sensitive, made it more challenging for the boy to maintain his privacy. However, through collective efforts, they managed to secure confidentiality for him. Despite the presence of an expert during the police interview with the boy, it appeared to have a detrimental effect on him. During this time, he stayed with his aunt, who became his official guardian. It is expected that once the fund raises enough money, she will receive financial support to help her nephew address his mental health issues. He continues to suffer from frequent panic attacks, disrupted sleep, and nightmares that have not improved. His aunt believes that the funds should not only cover rehabilitation but also ensure that he can pursue an education and rebuild his life. While this support may seem like a weak consolation and cannot bring back his loved ones, he must navigate a long and challenging recovery with the help of those close to him. Investigators were able to reconstruct the events surrounding the tragedy. It began after an argument between Jonathan and Lindsay escalated, leading him to grab a weapon. He first shot his wife, Lindsay, severely injuring her. She fell to the floor, bleeding but still alive. Jonathan, still armed, was consumed by rage as he entered the children's rooms. He encountered his 18-year-old son, Dylan, and attacked him on the head without hesitation. Dylan was using earplugs, likely to avoid being disturbed by the argument. It's possible that had he not been wearing them, the outcome might have been different. The fatal shot instantly claimed Dylan's life. Jonathan then moved to Ethan's room, where he also attacked his child on the head. The same tragic fate befell his 12-year-old son, Lucas. Only the youngest son, who is 10 years old, survived. The reasons for this remain unclear. Perhaps the father felt pity for the youngest, or he miscalculated and mistakenly overlooked his room. Jonathan went downstairs and returned to the living room. It seemed he understood what had happened, so he ended his life. On April 23rd, a group made up of people who cared for the family and the surviving child came to pay their respects. 39-year-old Lindsay was remembered as a devoted mother and loving wife. As a housewife, she did everything she could to ensure her children were comfortable. 18-year-old Dylan was described as a kind young man who supported his family and was always there for his loved ones. Intelligent and strong, he was a source of support for his friends. The family and friends are heartbroken by this tremendous loss. The youngest victim, 12-year-old Lucas, was unaware that the real threat to his life came from someone close to him. Jonathan will be remembered as a good father and husband, recognized for his ability to uplift spirits and make others laugh. Many struggled to believe that he could commit such an act. Although they acknowledged the evidence against him, they speculated that he was in a state of altered consciousness or psychosis that he couldn't control. At the last press conference, the detectives reported that there can be no doubt that the killer of the Candy family was Jonathan. However, by this time, there was no other information. The only thing the forensic scientist managed to achieve was to cross out any other suspects from the list. Unfortunately, even after several months, nothing new was found out, and the exact reason for the attack remains unknown. Laura Peacher, 28, was last seen on October 16, 2018, dining at a bar in Sebring. 3 days later, a restaurant employee in Tampa called 911 after finding something suspicious near a dumpster. Laura was a vibrant and social woman. She was born in Michigan in 1989, had an older sister and brother. Laura was born with a short left arm, featuring a thumb and 2 fingers. Throughout her life, she faced discrimination due to her physical difference, but she persevered and remained positive. Laura worked as a job coach at Goodwill, supporting individuals with physical and mental disabilities. Despite her own challenges, her disability was just a part of her unique character. Laura grew up in Michigan before moving to Sebring, Florida, at age 26. She relocated to assist her aging grandmother, demonstrating her caring nature by leaving her job to be there for family. On the morning of October 19, 2018, a 911 call was made by restaurant employees who discovered a woman's body near a dumpster behind their establishment. They reported a foul odor, initially suspecting it was from a dead animal. Upon closer inspection, they found what appeared to be a deceased woman. When detectives arrived, they found the victim face down, partially undressed, with a plastic bag over her head, part of the body covered by a wooden board. She was identified as Laura Peacher, wearing a dress that had been pulled down below her breasts. Her hands were tied behind her back with a purse strap. A search of the dumpster uncovered a clear plastic bag containing personal items, including mail and a wallet with an identification card. Investigators discovered that Laura was not from Tampa but lived in Sebring, Florida, roughly 2 hours away. She owned a silver Toyota Tundra pickup truck, which she likely used to travel to Tampa. However, her pickup truck was not found in the parking lot near the crime scene. It was later reported as stolen and added to a law enforcement database for recovery efforts. Investigators spoke with the restaurant manager about the situation. The restaurant owners had cleaned the parking lot just 2 days before, on Wednesday. Since Laura's body was found on Friday morning, it was likely placed there between Wednesday and Friday. The medical examiner conducted an autopsy and discovered clear marks on Laura's neck, suggesting she had been strangled with a thin, rope-like object. Additional signs on her body indicated that she had been on the ground for an extended period, with noticeable discoloration of her skin. The medical examiner determined that Laura had died on Wednesday, 2 days before her body was found. Meanwhile, 1,200 miles away in Michigan, police informed Laura's family about her death. Her parents were devastated and made a 20-hour journey from Michigan to Sebring. Meanwhile, her pickup truck was still missing. The investigators knew they needed to piece together the timeline of Laura's final hours to solve the case. They aimed to uncover why Laura had traveled from Sebring to Tampa, who she had met, and the whereabouts of her pickup truck. Detectives first examined Laura's cell phone records. They found that on Wednesday, between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m., she received calls but stopped answering her phone, indicating something had gone wrong. The records also revealed that she made 2 calls that morning to a man. Laura's friends identified him as her boyfriend, making him the first potential suspect. Detectives wanted to speak with him to determine when he last saw Laura and whether there were any issues in their relationship. Before they could locate Laura's boyfriend, police received a tip that Laura's pickup was seen outside a convenience store in Tampa. Detectives rushed to the store, located 3 miles from where Laura's body was found. Upon arrival, they discovered that the pickup truck was no longer there. However, both the exterior and interior of the store were equipped with surveillance cameras. The detectives hoped these would provide critical information. After reviewing the camera footage, investigators saw a pickup truck arrive and park at the store. Although they attempted to zoom in for better clarity, the video quality was poor, preventing them from identifying the driver. Once parked, a man got out of the passenger seat, indicating that there were at least 2 people in the vehicle. This man seemed aware of the cameras, as he kept his head down and wore a baseball cap. He entered the store, but again, the video quality made it impossible to see his face. The man tried to steal some beer, but store employees stopped him. After leaving the store, he returned to the pickup and sat in the passenger seat, while the driver remained in the vehicle and was not visible on the cameras. About an hour later, patrol officers found Laura's pickup truck parked on the road, showing signs of a minor accident. The same man seen in the surveillance footage was sitting in the passenger seat. Upon his arrest, he identified himself as Calvin Gary. He was on probation and wearing an ankle monitor. There was no one in the driver's seat of the pickup truck, only a pair of abandoned shoes, suggesting that the driver had run away. Laura's pickup was sent to forensics for a detailed search for any evidence while detectives began interviewing Calvin. He claimed he had obtained the truck from a man known as Hot. Calvin stated that Hot had recently arrived in the neighborhood and that they had plans to steal beer from a convenience store. When detectives asked Calvin if he knew how Hot acquired the pickup, he said he did not know. He maintained that he had no information about Laura or what had happened to her. Calvin described Hot as a relatively short African-American male. He also provided detectives with Hot's location, guiding them to a specific address. Upon arriving, the detectives found Hot hiding in a bush, trying to avoid being seen, but they spotted him. They called for him to come out. When he did, he was wearing a shirt and pants but no shoes. The detectives asked the man to identify himself, but he refused to provide his name and was uncooperative. They then requested that he walk over to their pickup truck, which was equipped with technology for quick fingerprint identification. When they scanned his fingerprint, it matched a record in their database, revealing that his real name was Gary Tyrone Danielle. He had a long criminal record and had been incarcerated 3 times. Additionally, Danielle was from Sebring, the same town where Laura lived. Because he was not wearing shoes, detectives became even more suspicious that he may have been driving Laura's pickup truck. However, at that time, the police did not have sufficient evidence to charge him with a crime, so they had to release him. The investigators then focused on Calvin Gary, who, along with Gary Danielle, had driven Laura's pickup truck. Since Calvin wore a monitoring device, law enforcement could track his whereabouts. They found that he had never gone to the dumpster where Laura's body was discovered, nor had he visited Sebring, where she lived. Because of this evidence, the police ruled him out as a suspect. After interviewing Laura's boyfriend, detectives also cleared him as a suspect thanks to his solid alibi. He told them that on the evening of Tuesday, October 16th, Laura had gone to a bar in Sebring. This detail was significant since Laura had been at the bar the night before her death, prompting detectives to visit the bar and talk to the staff. The manager revealed that Laura often stopped by for a meal since she lived nearby. The last time she had been there was on the night of Tuesday, October 16th, and she appeared to be friendly and happy, with no unusual behavior noted. Detectives discovered that the establishment had surveillance cameras that recorded everything. They reviewed the footage, which confirmed the bar manager's account. Laura was wearing the same dress as when her body was found. She was sitting at the bar, chatting with a waitress, had not ordered any alcohol, and nothing unusual was happening. She only spoke to the waitress before leaving around 11 p.m. Further investigation revealed that about 4 hours after Laura left the bar, a witness saw her with a man. Around 2:45 a.m., the witness spotted her at a gas station near a convenience store on the other side of town. At that time, Laura was in her pickup truck and appeared to be fine. There were no signs that she was in distress or needed assistance. The witness also stated that Laura drove away with a man. Investigators went to the gas station where Laura was last seen and reviewed the surveillance footage. At 2:54 a.m., they saw Gary Danielle enter the store to buy cigarettes and talk to another customer before leaving. Another camera recorded Laura's pickup truck backing out of the parking lot and onto the highway. This sighting aligned with an eyewitness report stating that they saw Danielle and Laura together at the gas station near Sebring early Wednesday morning. To find clues linking Gary Danielle to Laura's murder, investigators examined items found in a dumpster. They discovered a partially torn ATM receipt that provided details leading law enforcement to a specific ATM at a gas station in Lakeland. The receipt showed a transaction occurred at 3:30 p.m. on Wednesday, 12 hours after Laura was last seen in Sebring. Detectives then visited the gas station where the ATM was located, hoping the surveillance footage would help them solve the case. After reviewing the footage, investigators located Laura's pickup truck, but they couldn't identify who was inside. Luckily, there were several cameras, and after the truck was parked, they captured Gary Danielle getting out and walking to the store. He withdrew cash from the ATM, purchased a soda, and then left the store. Laura did not get out of the truck and was never seen, leading detectives to conclude that she was likely dead by the time Danielle returned to the truck and drove toward the location where her body was eventually discovered. Danielle was taken to the police station for questioning. At that time, the police only had evidence that he had used Laura's pickup truck, so they began asking him about it. Danielle claimed that he found an unlocked truck with the keys inside and decided to take it. He stated that was the only action he took, and he had no knowledge of who owned the pickup. He mentioned that the interior of the truck appeared normal and he didn't observe anything unusual. The detectives showed Danielle a picture of Laura and asked if he recognized her. He said he did not know her. When they inquired if he had ever met Laura in Sebring, he again replied no. They informed him that they had surveillance camera footage from a gas station in Sebring that showed him with Laura. Danielle understood that the police suspected him of Laura's murder and chose not to answer any more questions. At that point, the detectives lacked physical evidence to prove to a jury that Danielle had killed Laura. There is a specific time limit for a person to stand trial, which begins when the suspect is arrested. Since the detectives were still awaiting forensic results, they decided to release Danielle. Although there was a significant risk that he might flee, forensic analysis provided substantial insights into the case. Experts discovered drops of Laura's blood in the back seat of her pickup truck. This indicates that her body was likely in the back seat at some point after her death, or that the crime occurred inside the truck. Investigators received a forensic report on items found near Laura's body, which showed DNA on the strap used to bind her hands. This DNA matched that of Danielle. Additionally, his DNA was found under Laura's fingernails. The DNA evidence and surveillance footage were sufficient to file charges, leading to Gary Danielle's arrest. At the time of his arrest, Danielle did not make any statements and chose to exercise his right to remain silent. He faced charges of first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and grand theft of a motor vehicle. Using the evidence collected, investigators attempted to create a timeline of Laura's final hours. They confirmed that she had been at a bar in Sebring alone and left the bar around 11 p.m. Following that, she went to the town center, where she met friends. On that same night, she encountered Gary Danielle for the first time, with no prior relationship between them. Investigators suspect that Laura may have agreed to give Gary Danielle a ride, possibly in exchange for money. Danielle's refusal to answer questions has left investigators uncertain about how he and Laura first met. However, it is known that Laura and Danielle were seen together at a gas station, where an eyewitness confirmed that Laura appeared alive and unharmed in her pickup truck. After leaving the gas station, something occurred that led to Laura being found strangled in her truck. The exact location of the truck at the time of her death is still unknown. 12 hours after the last sighting of Laura's truck in Sebring, surveillance cameras captured it at a gas station 25 miles outside of Tampa. At that time, Danielle was withdrawing cash from an ATM. He then drove to Tampa, where he concealed Laura's body next to a dumpster in a restaurant parking lot. Her body was discovered 2 days later. The trial for Laura's murder did not begin until nearly 3 years after her death, a delay largely due to global events. Laura's father, Art Peacher, spent a long time waiting to confront the man responsible for his daughter's death in court. Rather than condemning Danielle, he chose to remember Laura by sharing a story about her kindness. Art recalled an incident where a young boy pointed out Laura's short arm, and another boy mentioned her asthma. Laura responded, "Don't you know there's something wrong with everyone?" Her father presented several items in court that belonged to his daughter, including her journal. The cover of the journal had the phrase, "Live the life you've imagined." Inside, she had written about her dislike for cooking since she lived alone and had no one to help with the dishes. She also expressed her hatred for littering and shared her thoughts about her 4 tattoos. The most significant tattoo for her was a blackbird, which was a tribute to her sister-in-law who had passed away, inspired by a song. On August 24, 2021, Gary Danielle, age 50, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder as part of a deal with state prosecutors. In return for his plea, he accepted a 30-year prison sentence. He also confessed to charges of tampering with evidence and stealing a motor vehicle. During the short court hearing, Danielle, who is bald, has a short gray beard, and was dressed in orange jail clothing and handcuffed, remained silent in the jury box and did not address Laura Peacher's family. While the guilty plea concluded the legal proceedings, it left many questions unanswered, such as the reasons behind Laura's murder and how she came to be in contact with Danielle. At first, building a business together seems ideal. There's trust, less risk of betrayal, and profits stay within the family. However, what happens when a small venture rapidly expands into a multi-million or multi-billion-dollar empire? The case of Andrine was complicated and unsettling. She went missing from her own home, and few believed she was still alive. However, without a body or strong evidence against the suspect, the investigation stalled. Months went by with no progress. The suspect seemed likely to go free. Just when it seemed all hope was lost, a local rancher made a shocking discovery that changed everything. Andrine McDonald, born Anderson, was born on September 23, 1989, in Port Antonio, Portland, Jamaica. Her parents were Jamaicans who immigrated to the United States. She is the second of 3 daughters. Known for her friendly nature, charm, and good looks, Andrine had many friends and received a lot of admiration. While in high school, Andrine formed a close friendship with Andre McDonald. Andre was also born and raised in Jamaica. He was the only child of Marina and Everton McDonald. His parents eventually separated while Andre was still in school, and his father moved to the United States, where he remarried another woman. In the early 2000s, Andre moved to Florida to live with his father. He attended the International Technical University and earned an engineering degree. Instead of following a career in engineering, he chose to enter the military, signing a contract and serving in the U.S. Armed Forces. Throughout his military service, Andre and Andrine maintained regular contact through calls, messages, and visits whenever he returned to Jamaica to see his mother. Their relationship deepened over time, evolving into a meaningful, long-term partnership, and they realized they couldn't imagine life without each other. After graduating high school, Andrine moved to the United States to be with Andre. About a year later, they had a small wedding with only their closest family and friends. Shortly after their marriage, Andre was transferred from sunny Florida to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. He quickly began planning for their future, and Andrine enrolled at the University of Texas to pursue a degree in economics. In 2013, they welcomed their daughter. Around the same time, they started a business by opening their first. The assisted living is called Starlight Homes. The venture quickly gained popularity, leading them to open a second facility in another city soon after. Within a few years, their network of assisted living was generating substantial income. While Andre continued his military career and traveled frequently for work, Andrine took charge of managing their multi-million-dollar business's daily operations. They purchased a beautiful home with a pool in an upscale neighborhood in Behar County, owned several luxury vehicles, and planned to expand their business into nearby states. In 2016, after her father's passing, Andrine brought her mother from Jamaica to live with them. Her mother helped around the house and cared for their daughter when both parents were busy. A few years later, they bought her a small, comfortable house nearby and gifted her a personal vehicle. In early 2019, 37-year-old Andre, a major in the U.S. Air Force, chose to move to the reserves. He wanted to stay in San Antonio to spend more time with his family and get more involved in their flourishing business, easing the workload for his wife, Andrine. Their company, which consisted of a network of assisted living facilities, was thriving and had grown across the state to be worth nearly $1 billion. From the outside, the McDonald family seemed to have it all: success, wealth, a bright daughter, and a successful business. However, beneath this facade of prosperity, tensions were starting to rise, issues unknown to most people. On Friday, March 1, 2019, 29-year-old Andrine did not show up for work, and her phone was turned off. This was very unusual for her. Concerned, her assistant and close friend, Carol, reached out multiple times but couldn't get in touch. Eventually, Carol and 2 colleagues decided to visit the McDonald home to check on Andrine. After knocking for a long time without an answer, Carol refused to leave and began walking around the house to investigate. In the backyard, she discovered something troubling: a charred spot with a zipper partially sticking out of the ashes, suggesting someone had been burning clothes. But who would do such a thing, and why? Nothing else appeared suspicious from the outside. When Carol pulled on the back door and found it unlocked, she stepped inside cautiously. She called out for Andrine and Andre but got no response. The house was eerily quiet, as if they had just stepped out. In the bathroom, she spotted odd streaks on the light switch that appeared to be dried blood, along with dark stains on the floor that raised alarm bells. Carol recorded her observations on her phone and contacted the local authorities to report her findings. Officers arrived quickly and began searching the home. Their discoveries heightened the concerns. The carpet in the master bedroom had been scrubbed with a strong industrial cleaner, leaving a lingering chemical smell. There were faint blood spots on the floor and a smear on the doorframe. Detectives thought this could be the scene of a serious crime, but the minimal blood left some hope that Andrine might be alive. Andre was unreachable by phone, and his location was unknown. Initially, the whereabouts of their daughter were also uncertain, but authorities soon confirmed she was safe at her paternal grandmother's house. All three of McDonald's vehicles were present, two were parked outside and the third, a Chevrolet Malibu, was in the garage. The car caught the officers' attention because it was covered in dust, indicating it had likely been on dirt roads recently, with small gravel stuck in the tires. Although there were no clear signs of damage or blood, the state of the car raised suspicions. While investigators were still inspecting the house, the homeowner, Andre, suddenly appeared at the front door. He appeared anxious and confused about the police presence on his property. When questioned about his whereabouts and what had happened, Andre stated that he had spent the night looking for his wife. He mentioned several hospitals he had visited to check if Andrine had been admitted. A follow-up confirmed that Andre had indeed gone to those hospitals. Additionally, at one of the hospitals, when the staff mentioned that someone with the last name McDonald had been checked in, Andre reportedly turned pale, stepped back, and quickly left without realizing it was just another person with the same last name. From the beginning, Andre's actions raised red flags. The officers decided to question him to hear his side of the story. Andre explained that he and Andrine had a domestic argument, so he left the house to calm down. When he came back, she was not there. He mentioned that he tried calling her multiple times, and when she didn't answer, he took their daughter to his mother's house and kept looking for Andrine. It was hard to track his movements because his phone had been turned off since the night before and stayed off until he returned. When the officers asked why his phone was off, Andre changed his demeanor and said he wouldn't answer any more questions without a lawyer. At that point, investigators realized something was off. However, without strong evidence, they had to release him after the first interview. He was given a travel restriction order and placed under discreet surveillance at his home. It was later revealed that on the same day Andrine went missing, he had made several concerning purchases at different hardware stores. He paid in cash for items such as a shovel, large heavy-duty trash bags, a small hatchet, work gloves, duct tape, and fire starter fluid. Andre seemed to be trying to leave no trace by keeping his phone off and not using a credit card. Nevertheless, law enforcement tracked him down using security camera footage from those stores. Meanwhile, forensic testing confirmed that the blood found at the home belonged to Andrine. As suspicions intensified, the police decided to detain Andre for further questioning and obtained a warrant to conduct a comprehensive search of his home, including the seizure and examination of all digital devices. During a brief period when he went missing, Andre returned home but left almost immediately, unaware that officers were tracking him. He stopped at a gun shop, where he bought a large-caliber handgun and a substantial amount of ammunition, paying in cash. Strangely, after completing the purchase, he turned and walked out of the store, leaving the firearm and ammunition on the counter. His demeanor appeared disconnected, his eyes were vacant, and his movements erratic, suggesting a loss of touch with reality. However, experienced officers suspected this behavior was an act, possibly a prelude to a future defense claiming mental instability. Andre was arrested as he exited the store, and he did not resist. Formal charges were filed against him. During a physical examination, investigators discovered fresh scratches on his hands and forearms, which appeared to be fingernail marks. Although Andre could not provide a clear explanation for these injuries, those present recognized the likely cause, a struggle. Nearly 48 hours had passed since Andrine was last seen. The increasing circumstantial evidence made it hard to believe she might still be alive. A large-scale search effort was launched, involving law enforcement, volunteers, and hundreds of concerned citizens. Teams searched the areas around San Antonio, particularly the rural parts of Bexar County, hoping to find clues to advance the investigation. Sadly, they found nothing useful, neither in the fields, wooded areas, nor urban zones. Even a thorough examination of the digital devices taken from the home, including a phone and tablet, did not produce any promising leads. However, when investigators conducted a second, more thorough search of the vehicles and garage, the case changed dramatically. They found newly purchased tools and supplies that matched items Andre had bought at several hardware stores. Then, in the trunk of Andre's Porsche Macan, they discovered a shovel wrapped in plastic. The shovel had strange dark stains on it and several long strands of hair attached to it. Forensic analysis confirmed that the blood and tissue on the shovel matched Andrine's DNA. The hair strands were also hers. However, the handle had been wiped clean of fingerprints. When questioned, Andre claimed he had never seen the shovel before and suggested that someone must have planted it in his car. Despite the growing evidence against him, Andre posted bail, set at $2 million, which he paid immediately, allowing for his swift release. Once home, he did not join the ongoing search for Andrine. He maintained his story that they had an argument, he left to calm down, and when he returned, Andrine was missing. Andre claimed he tried to contact her afterwards, sending both voice and text messages. Some of these messages, which were found on his phone, contained emotional appeals, telling her their daughter was crying and urging her to come home. All of these messages were sent around midnight, after which his phone was turned off again. As the investigation into her disappearance continued without any leads, detectives decided to look into the McDonald family's background. They quickly discovered that their seemingly perfect relationship was misleading. In reality, their marriage was under significant strain for quite some time. Although they had built a successful business together that was growing rapidly and generating good income, most daily operations were handled by Andrine, especially while Andre was serving in the military. During Andre's 6-month deployment in Alabama in 2016, their emotional distance increased. Just before he was scheduled to return home, Andrine messaged him suggesting that they should go their separate ways and that he didn't need to come back. When Andre returned, he found out that while he was away, Andrine had begun a relationship with other man, Aubin Hall, whom she had known since her childhood in Jamaica, also her ex-lover. She even has a tattoo on her arm that is the letter A, the first letter of Aubin's name, which she says was a mistake of her youth. Aubin and Andrine reconnected during one of Andrine's visits to Jamaica, leading to a rekindling of their relationship. He started visiting her in Texas, and they decided they wanted to be together, prompting Andrine to file for divorce. Under Texas law, Andrine and Andre were required to divide their assets and business equally, which caused significant disagreement between them. Andrine felt entitled to a larger share because she managed the operations, while Andre argued that everything belonged to him since he had funded the initial startup. About 6 months later, the divorce proceedings were put on hold as they appeared to have reconciled, deciding to give their marriage another chance for the sake of their young daughter. However, despite this outward appearance of stability, underlying tensions remained. Andre had consistently opposed Andrine's trips back to Jamaica because he knew she would meet her former lover, leading to ongoing conflict between them, but Andrine continued to make her own decisions. Carol, Andrine's closest friend and the first to alert authorities after Andrine's disappearance, described Andre as controlling, manipulative. He believed that the business, their home, and even Andrine herself were his possessions, citing that he had brought her to the U.S., helped her gain citizenship, paid for her college education, and financed their first assisted living. Shortly before she went missing, Andrine confided in Carol, saying, "If anything ever happens to her, just know it was Andre." Just 2 weeks before Andrine disappeared, Andre found out that she had secretly registered a new company in her name and moved part of their shared assets into it. This discovery likely felt like a betrayal and may have contributed to the tensions between them. On July 11, 2019, 4.5 months after Andrine went missing, a local farmer named Clifton Clavin was walking on his property on the outskirts of San Antonio. Since the land was only partially cultivated, some areas had become overgrown. While surveying the grounds for future maintenance, Clifton noticed a strong, unpleasant smell that seemed to be related to decomposition. Assuming it was the scent of a dead animal, he followed it, intending to bury or remove whatever he found. In the tall grass, he first saw a skull and some bones that looked like they belonged to a cow. However, under some scattered branches, he discovered the real source of the odor, a nearly fully decomposed human body. Clifton immediately contacted the police. The remains were recovered and sent to a lab for analysis. The body was found unclothed, and while it was confirmed to be a woman, investigators could determine little else initially. Given the circumstances, many suspected that this was Andreen MacDonald, and DNA testing later confirmed those suspicions. The medical examiner was unable to determine a clear cause of death due to the advanced decomposition of the body. However, pathologists found injuries including trauma to the jawbone and a fracture at the base of the skull, which matched the type of harm that could be caused by the hammer found in Andre's car. Additionally, much of her hair was missing, which was initially alarming. When the examiners observed partial burns on her right hand, they deduced that someone had tried to burn the body, probably to destroy evidence. As a result of these findings, Andre was officially charged with the crime and taken back into custody. The area where the remains were discovered had been searched several times by law enforcement and volunteers, but the exact location was on private property, behind a fence about 60 feet from the road, making it inaccessible without a warrant. This is why it had not been investigated earlier. When Andre learned that Andreen's remains were found and that evidence indicated she had suffered blunt force trauma, he changed his approach. He informed investigators that he was willing to share everything in exchange for a lighter sentence. After talking with his attorney, Andre presented a revised version of events, painting himself as a victim. He mentioned his wife's infidelity, her attempts to take over their business with her new partner, and his fear that she would take their daughter from him during a divorce. Andre reported that Andreen had recently mentioned ending their marriage again and had allegedly threatened to leave him without anything and take their daughter with her. That evening, they had a heated argument. Andre claimed that Andreen grew aggressive and started hitting him, which led him to defend himself. During the struggle, he said she got a minor cut. Andre admitted to pushing her, causing her to fall, and he then kicked her several times and stepped on her chest to keep her from getting back up. When he heard footsteps in the hallway and his daughter calling for her mom, he panicked. He quickly left the room before the girl could come inside, picked her up, took her back to her room, and told her that her mom would come to check on her later. Andre maintained that when he left the room, Andreen was still alive, lying on the floor with only a slight injury. However, when he returned, she was in the same position but unresponsive. He believed that he might have unintentionally contributed to a fatal outcome by applying too much pressure on her chest during the struggle. Realizing the seriousness of what had happened, Andre began to panic. He took off Andreen's clothes and burned them in his backyard. He then moved her body outside the city, leaving it on private property behind a fence near the remains of a cow. Later, he went home and sent many texts to Andreen's phone, begging her to return, hoping to make it look like she had simply left after a disagreement. Following that, he woke his daughter and took her to his mother's house, asking her to care for her granddaughter while he searched for his missing wife. To further support his story, he visited several hospitals, pretending to look for Andreen. He nearly fainted upon hearing that a woman with the same last name had been admitted to one of the hospitals. By the time the police brought him in for questioning the next morning, they still lacked strong evidence against him, so he was released. After being freed, Andre began to seriously consider ways to ensure the body would never be discovered. He even thought about dismembering and burning it, then scattering the remains in different locations. To do this, he purchased a hatchet, a shovel, fire starter fluid, and heavy-duty plastic bags. The following day, he returned to the location where he had left Andreen. However, when it was time to execute his plan, he could not go through with it. Instead, he poured flammable liquid on her body and attempted to light a fire, but it quickly went out, only burning her hair and partially charring one of her hands. Andre later described the failure as leaving him in a state of utter despair. In a moment of anger, He grabbed an old hammer from his car and struck the body several times before regaining his composure and stopping. He then covered the remains with branches and cow bones. When asked why he visited a gun store, purchased a pistol and ammunition, and then left the items at the counter, Andre stated he couldn't explain his actions. He mentioned that his thoughts were muddled, he hadn't slept for almost 2 days, and he wasn't thinking clearly. The trial faced significant delays, with hearings only commencing in January 2023. The defense team aimed to present Andre as a victim of his circumstances. His lawyers argued that Andrine and her boyfriend were allegedly conspiring to eliminate Andre from their lives to avoid splitting their assets during the divorce. Andre McDonald provided a detailed account of what happened to his wife, but the condition of her body made it impossible to verify his claims. Forensic experts could not determine her exact cause of death or whether her injuries occurred while she was alive or if, as Andre alleged, he hit her with a hammer after she died. What was evident, however, is that for 5 months, Andre stayed silent, trying to conceal the crime and evade responsibility. In February 2023, many were shocked when Andre was acquitted of first-degree murder charges. Instead, the jury convicted him of manslaughter and evidence tampering, resulting in a 25-year prison sentence with the possibility of parole after 15 years. His daughter was awarded to her maternal grandmother. The tragic saga of Andrine McDonald reveals the fragility of trust and the devastating consequences when hidden tensions erupt within a seemingly idyllic life. What began as a shared dream of building a family and a multi-million-dollar empire ended in betrayal, violence, and loss. Andre McDonald's conviction for manslaughter and evidence tampering in February 2023, carrying a 25-year sentence, brought partial justice but left lingering questions about the truth behind Andrine's death. As their daughter finds solace with her maternal grandmother, the McDonald case stands as a stark reminder that even the most prosperous facades can conceal deadly secrets, urging us to confront conflicts before they spiral into tragedy.